They called her worthless, a barren woman traded like livestock to save her sister from the devil himself. Amelia Hart never imagined her family's debt would end with her standing in Lorenzo Valenti's marble fortress, waiting to be destroyed by New York's most feared mafia boss. But the monster who bought her didn't want her body. He wanted something far stranger, stories. Every night, a voice from the shadows demanded she speak until sunrise. Every word she whispered kept her alive. Every secret she uncovered pulled her deeper into a darkness that would either consume her or set them both free. If you're ready to dive into Amelia and Lorenzo's dangerous world, stay until the end, hit that like button, and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The marriage certificate felt like a death warrant in Amelia Hart's trembling hands. She stood in the cramped living room of her family's Queens apartment, surrounded by peeling wallpaper and the smell of desperation that had seeped into every corner of their lives. Outside, the February rain hammered against windows that hadn't been properly sealed in years, letting cold drafts whisper through the room like ghosts of better times. "Sign it." Her father's voice cut through the silence, sharp and final. Amelia looked up at Robert Hart, the man who had once carried her on his shoulders through Central Park, who had promised her that hard work and goodness would be rewarded. That man was gone. In his place stood someone hollowed out by gambling debts and broken pride, his eyes unable to meet hers. "Dad, please, sign the damn paper, Amelia." Her mother, Patricia, stood by the window, arms crossed over her chest, her face turned away. "You heard what they said. Either you go or they take Sophie." Sophie. Her younger sister sat curled on the couch, 19 years old and sobbing into her hands, her perfect face blotchy with tears. Beautiful Sophie, who had caught the attention of Lorenzo Valenti's men at the restaurant where she worked. Beautiful, fertile Sophie, who still had a future, unlike Amelia. "I'm 28 years old," Amelia said quietly, her fingers still hovering over the signature line. "I have my teaching certificate. I could get a job, help pay." "With what?" Her father's laugh was bitter. "You think your substitute teacher salary makes a dent in $200,000? You think the Valenti family gives a damn about your community college degree?" The words hit like physical blows. Amelia had spent 4 years working 2 jobs to finish that degree. 4 years of night classes and exhaustion, believing education was her way out. Her way to matter. "Robert," a new voice entered the conversation, smooth as expensive whiskey. Vincent Calabrese stood near the door, Valenti's attorney, his tailored suit worth more than everything in the apartment combined. "Perhaps we should clarify the terms for Miss Hart." He moved closer, and Amelia caught the scent of cologne that probably cost more per ounce than her monthly grocery budget. Vincent's smile was professional, almost kind, which somehow made everything worse. "Mr. Valenti is a businessman," Vincent explained, as if negotiating a simple contract. "Your family's debt to his organization is substantial. Your father borrowed money he couldn't repay. Your sister attracted attention she couldn't handle. These situations have consequences." "You mean I'm the consequence?" Amelia said. Vincent's smile didn't waver. "You're the solution, Mr. Valenti requires a wife for certain business purposes. The marriage is primarily transactional. You'll live in his residence, attend necessary functions, and fulfill basic obligations. In return, your family's debt is forgiven, and your sister remains untouched." "What obligations?" Amelia's voice was steadier than she felt. Something flickered in Vincent's eyes, pity, maybe, or warning. "That will be between you and Mr. Valenti." "She can't give him children," Patricia blurted out from the window, her voice cracking. "The doctor said, after the accident—" "Mother!" Amelia's face flushed hot with humiliation. "They should know!" Patricia whirled around, tears streaming down her face. "She's damaged goods. Maybe if they know, they'll take Sophie instead, and at least one of my daughters will—" "Enough!" Robert's shout silenced the room. Then quieter, defeated. "Vincent knows. Valenti knows. They don't care about children. That's not what this is about." The words settled over Amelia like a burial shroud. They didn't care. Of course they didn't. She wasn't being chosen. She was being disposed of. The infertile daughter, the worthless one, the acceptable sacrifice. "Miss Hart." Vincent held out an expensive pen. "The car is waiting." Through the window, Amelia could see the black Mercedes idling at the curb, rain sliding down its tinted windows. A cage on wheels, ready to transport her to a bigger cage. Can I? Her voice broke. She steadied it. Can I pack some things? Already handled. Vincent gestured to a small suitcase by the door that Amelia hadn't noticed. Her mother had packed for her, had already decided this was happening, had probably been relieved in some horrible way that it wasn't Sophie. Amelia took the pen. Her hand shook as she pressed it to paper. Wait. Sophie's voice was small, broken. She stood up from the couch, mascara streaking her perfect face. Amelia, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Don't. Amelia signed her name in quick, angry strokes. Just don't. She couldn't look at Sophie, couldn't look at any of them. If she did, she might crumble completely, and she refused to give them that, refused to break in front of the family who had just sold her to a monster. Vincent took the papers, examined the signature, and nodded. The marriage is legally binding as of this moment. Mr. Valenti signed his portion this morning. Congratulations, Mrs. Valenti. The title felt like a noose around her neck. Let's go, she said. The ride from Queens to Manhattan should have taken 40 minutes, but it felt like 40 seconds and 40 hours simultaneously. Amelia sat in the back of the Mercedes, Vincent beside her maintaining a polite silence, while the city blurred past the windows. They crossed the Queensboro Bridge as night fell, the skyline emerging like a fairy tale that had never belonged to her. She'd grown up looking at those towers, dreaming of the lives lived inside them. Now she was entering that world, and it was nothing like she'd imagined. May I offer some advice? Vincent asked as they turned onto the Upper East Side. Amelia kept her eyes on the window. Would it matter if I said no? Probably not. A hint of warmth touched his voice. Mr. Valenti is complicated. The stories you've heard about him are largely true. He's dangerous, ruthless, and controls more of this city than most people realize. But he's also bound by certain rules, certain codes. Is there a code about not murdering your wife? There's a code about protecting what's his. Vincent's tone sharpened. As of tonight, you are his. That means no one touches you, no one threatens you, and no one disrespects you without answering to him. Even in this arrangement, you have value. Amelia finally turned to look at him. Just not the value of being human. Vincent's expression was unreadable. In our world, Mrs. Valenti, being human is often a liability. Being useful is what keeps you alive. The car pulled up to a building that made Amelia's breath catch, despite everything. The Valenti estate occupied an entire block of Fifth Avenue, a limestone fortress disguised as a mansion, with guards at the gate and cameras tracking their approach. We're here, Vincent said unnecessarily. The driver opened Amelia's door. She stepped out into the cold March air, her thin coat completely inadequate for the wind whipping off Central Park across the street. The mansion loomed above her, every window glowing with warm light that promised comfort she suspected she'd never feel. This way. Vincent led her up marble steps, through double doors that probably cost more than her childhood home, into a foyer that belonged in a museum. Crystal chandeliers, artwork she vaguely recognized from textbooks, floors so polished she could see her reflection, a small, scared woman who didn't belong. Mrs. Chen will show you to your quarters. Vincent gestured to an older woman in a crisp uniform who appeared from a side hallway. You'll have tonight to settle in. Mr. Valenti will send for you when he's ready. When will that be? When he's ready. Vincent's smile was sympathetic but firm. Welcome to your new home, Mrs. Valenti. He left. The doors closed behind him with a sound of finality that echoed through the cavernous space. Follow me. Mrs. Chen's voice was clipped, professional, and utterly cold. She turned and walked away without checking if Amelia followed. Amelia grabbed her suitcase and hurried after her, trying not to gawk at the opulence surrounding her. Every painting, every sculpture, every carefully placed vase screamed wealth beyond comprehension. This was what her family's debt had bought her into. This was what she was worth, a transaction to keep a monster in expensive things. They climbed a grand staircase, turned down a hallway lined with closed doors, and stopped at the very last one. Your room, Mrs. Chen said, opening the door. It was bigger than Amelia's entire queen's apartment. A four-poster bed dominated the space, dressed in cream and gold. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Central Park, a sitting area, a desk, a door that presumably led to a private bathroom. It was beautiful. It was a prison. Dinner is at 8 in the formal dining room. Breakfast is at 7. You're expected to dress appropriately. Mrs. Chen's gaze raked over Amelia's cheap coat and bargain store dress. There are clothes in the closet. They should fit. How? Mr. Valenti is thorough. Mrs. Chen's expression suggested this was not a compliment. A stylist will come tomorrow to assess your wardrobe needs. The staff is instructed to provide anything you require. However, her voice hardened. You do not leave the estate without permission. You do not enter Mr. Valenti's private wing without invitation. You do not speak to the press, the police, or anyone else about your marriage or this household. Any violation will be dealt with severely. Am I a wife or a prisoner? You're whatever Mr. Valenti decides you are. Mrs. Chen turned to leave, then paused. A word of advice, Mrs. Valenti. The master's previous arrangements didn't end well for the women involved. If you value your life, you'll remember that you're here to serve a purpose, not to ask questions or cause trouble. She left, closing the door with a soft click that somehow sounded like a cell locking. Amelia stood frozen in the center of the room, her suitcase still clutched in her hand, her entire body beginning to shake with the adrenaline crash of the last few hours. Sold, married, imprisoned, all in the span of an evening. She moved to the window and pressed her forehead against the cold glass, looking out at Central Park, where normal people walked normal lives. People who chose their marriages. People who weren't currency in their families' debts. The tears came then, hot and bitter and silent. She cried for the life she'd lost, for the family who'd thrown her away, for the future that had been stolen before it began. She cried until there was nothing left, until the grief hardened into something else. Survival. If this was her life now, she would survive it. She'd survived her parents' disappointment when she couldn't have children. She'd survived being the invisible daughter, the one nobody wanted. She'd survived Lorenzo Valenti too, whatever he was, whatever he wanted. She just had to make it through one night at a time. A knock on the door made her jump. Yes? A young woman in a maid's uniform entered, carrying a tray. Dinner, Mrs. Valenti. Mrs. Chen said you'd take it in your room tonight. Thank you, Amelia managed. The maid set the tray on the desk, soup, bread, salad, all artfully arranged, and turned to go. At the door, she hesitated. Ma'am, I just wanted to say... She glanced nervously at the hallway. We're glad you're here. The last one, she was... Well, Mr. Valenti gets lonely. Maybe you'll be different. Before Amelia could ask what that meant, the girl was gone. Amelia stared at the closed door, her mind racing. The last one. Previous arrangements that didn't end well. Mr. Valenti gets lonely. What exactly had she been sold into? She picked at the food, managing a few bites before nausea overwhelmed her appetite. The soup was probably delicious. Everything in this place probably was, but it tasted like ash in her mouth. At 9 o'clock, another knock came. Mrs. Valenti? A man's voice this time, deep and emotionless. Mr. Valenti requests your presence. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. Whatever she was here for, whatever obligations Vincent had mentioned, they were about to become horrifyingly clear. I'll be right there, she called, her voice surprisingly steady. She checked her reflection in the bathroom mirror. The cheap dress her mother had chosen for her wedding looked even worse against the luxury of the room. Her dark hair was tangled from the rain, her eyes red from crying, her face pale and frightened. She looked exactly like what she was, a woman sold into servitude. But she lifted her chin anyway, squared her shoulders. If she was going to face a monster, she'd do it standing straight. The man waiting in the hallway was built like a wall, 6.5 feet of muscle in a dark suit with a gun visible under his jacket. He didn't introduce himself, just gestured for her to follow. They walked through the mansion's maze of hallways, past more luxury than Amelia had seen in her lifetime, until they reached a wing that felt different, older. The lights were dimmer here, the air cooler. The guard stopped at a heavy wooden door. Inside, he said. The master will join you shortly. He opened the door and stood waiting for her to enter. Amelia's hands were shaking again. She clasped them together, took a breath, and stepped into the room. The door closed behind her with a sound like a tomb ceiling. The room was massive and dark, lit only by a fireplace at the far end and a few scattered candles. Heavy curtains covered the windows. The furniture was old, expensive, and sparse. A few chairs, a table, shelves lined with books. It felt less like a bedroom and more like a library, or a sanctuary, or a cage. "Sit." Amelia gasped and spun toward the voice. It came from the shadows near the fireplace, deep and rough, with an accent she couldn't quite place. Italian, but older, stranger. "Where?" She tried to see him, but the shadows were too thick. "I said sit." The voice was harder now, commanding. Amelia's legs moved before her brain could catch up. She sat in one of the chairs, her back straight, her hands folded in her lap to hide their shaking. Silence stretched between them. She could feel eyes on her, watching from the darkness, but couldn't see him. The fire crackled and popped, the only sound in the suffocating quiet. "Do you know why you're here?" the voice finally asked. "My family's debt," Amelia said. "I'm payment." Honest. A sound that might have been approval. "Your sister was supposed to come. Why did they send you instead?" "Because I'm expendable." The words came out bitter. "I can't have children. I'm not beautiful like Sophie. I'm not worth keeping." "And you believe that?" The question caught her off guard. "Does it matter what I believe?" "It matters to me." Amelia turned toward the shadows, trying to make out any shape, any detail. "Why?" "You bought me. I'm here." "What does my opinion have to do with anything?" "Because you'll be spending every night in this room with me for the foreseeable future, Mrs. Valenti, and I'd rather not listen to a woman who despises herself." Every night, the words sent ice through her veins. "What do you want from me?" Movement in the shadows. A figure shifted, still hidden, but closer now. "What do you think I want?" "I don't know." Amelia's voice was barely a whisper. "Everyone says you're a monster, that you've killed people, hurt people, that nobody crosses you and lives. I don't know what monsters want." "Fair enough." The voice paused. "I want you to tell me a story." Amelia blinked. "What?" "A story. Any story, real or imagined. I want you to talk until the sun rises." This had to be a trick, some kind of test before the real horror began. "I don't understand." "You don't need to understand." The figure moved again, and Amelia caught a glimpse of a hand, pale, with long fingers, gripping the arm of a chair. "You only need to speak. Tell me about your life. Tell me a fairy tale. Make something up. I don't care. Just talk." "And if I refuse?" "Then you'll sit in silence until dawn, and we'll try again tomorrow night, and the night after." "And the night after that?" The voice was patient, almost amused. "But I think you'll talk. Humans always do, eventually. It's lonely in the dark." Amelia's mind reeled. This was insane. She'd been sold to a mafia boss who wanted bedtime stories. "I was a teacher," she found herself saying. "Before this, substitute mostly. Elementary school. The kids always wanted stories at the end of the day if we had time." "Tell me one of those stories." She opened her mouth, then closed it. This was absurd, surreal, and yet somehow less terrifying than what she'd expected. "Once upon a time," she began, her voice shaking, "there was a girl who lived in a tower." And she talked. For hours she talked. She told him the sanitized fairy tales she'd read to children, then the darker original versions she'd studied in college. When those ran out, she told him about books she'd loved, movies she'd seen, plays she'd watched from the cheap seats. The voice never interrupted, never questioned, just listened from the shadows, a presence she felt more than saw. As the night wore on, exhaustion crept into Amelia's bones. Her voice grew hoarse, her eyes heavy. But every time she paused, the voice would prompt her. "And then?" Or, "What happened next?" Finally, when her throat was raw and she could barely keep her eyes open, gray light began to filter through the heavy curtains. "Dawn," the voice said. "You survived the night." "That's it?" Amelia croaked. "That's all you wanted?" "For tonight." The shadow shifted, moving away from her, deeper into the darkness. "Tomorrow night, same time." And the night after? Every night, Mrs. Valenti. Your voice for my protection. That's our arrangement. I don't understand any of this. You don't need to. The voice was fading now, withdrawing. You only need to come back tomorrow night and talk until sunrise. Can you do that? Amelia thought about her family, selling her like livestock. About Sophie crying fake tears while letting her sister take her place. About the cold eyes of the servants who looked at her like she was already a ghost. Yes, she said, I can do that. Good. A pause, then softer. Your voice is pleasant, Mrs. Valenti. Better than I expected. I think we'll manage well enough. The door opened behind her. The same guard stood waiting. Get some rest, the voice said from the shadows. Tonight, I want to hear about you. The real stories. Not fairy tales. Amelia stood on shaking legs and walked to the door, her mind spinning with questions she didn't dare ask. At the threshold, she stopped. Can I ask one thing? Silence. Then, ask. Why won't you let me see you? The laugh that came from the darkness was bitter and tired. Because you're already frightened enough, Mrs. Valenti. Let's not make it worse just yet. The door closed, and Amelia was led back through the silent mansion to her gilded cage of a room. The sun was rising over Central Park, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that seemed to belong to a different world entirely. She collapsed onto the bed, still fully dressed, her mind unable to process the bizarre reality of her situation. She'd expected violence, degradation, horror. Instead, she'd spent the night telling stories to a voice in the dark. What kind of monster wanted bedtime stories? And why did his voice sound so desperately lonely? She fell asleep with those questions unanswered, and dreamed of shadows that listened without judgment, and towers that kept both prisoners and protection within their walls. When she woke in the afternoon, a note was waiting on her bedside table, written in elegant script. Tonight, tell me why they called you worthless. I want to know if they were right. L. Amelia crumpled the note in her fist, something hot and painful burning in her chest. She'd spent 28 years being invisible, being the disappointing daughter, being not enough. Now a monster in the dark wanted to hear her story. And despite everything, the fear, the anger, the grief, some small part of her wanted to tell it. Amelia stared at the crumpled note in her hand, the elegant handwriting blurring as tears she refused to shed burned behind her eyes. The afternoon sun streamed through the massive windows, highlighting every corner of the luxurious prison she now called home. She smoothed the paper against her knee, reading the words again. Tonight, tell me why they called you worthless. I want to know if they were right. The audacity of the question made her laugh, a short, bitter sound that echoed in the empty room. A monster wanted to judge her value, as if she hadn't spent her entire life being weighed and found wanting by everyone who was supposed to love her. A knock interrupted her spiral of thoughts. Mrs. Valenti? A woman's voice, younger than Mrs. Chen's, filtered through the door. I'm here for your styling appointment. Amelia wiped her face and stood, shoving the note into her pocket. Come in. The woman who entered was striking, tall, dark-skinned, with an elegant bearing that made Amelia feel even more like an imposter in this world of polished perfection. She carried a tablet and wore an expression of professional assessment. I'm Simone. She extended her hand and Amelia shook it, surprised by the genuine warmth in the gesture. Mr. Valenti has asked me to ensure you have everything you need, wardrobe-wise. May I? She gestured toward the massive closet. Of course. Amelia followed her, watching as Simone opened the closet doors to reveal racks of clothing that hadn't been there last night. Dresses, pants, blouses, all in neutral tones, and Amelia's exact size. He's thorough, Amelia murmured, echoing Mrs. Chen's words. Simone glanced at her, something like sympathy crossing her features. He is, but he's also particular. These are basics, quality pieces, but nothing with personality. That's what I'm here to add. She pulled out her tablet, fingers flying across the screen. Tell me, Mrs. Valenti, what do you actually like to wear? The question was so unexpected that Amelia almost laughed again. Does it matter? It does to me. Simone looked up, her gaze direct. I've worked for Mr. Valenti for 3 years. He pays me to make people look the way they want to look, not the way he wants them to look. So I'll ask again. What do you like? Amelia thought about her tiny closet in Queens, filled with clearance rack finds and hand-me-downs. I don't know if I've ever had a chance to develop a preference. Then let's discover one together. Simone smiled, and it reached her eyes. We'll start with basics. Colors you're drawn to. Silhouettes that make you feel confident instead of costumed. For the next hour, Simone worked with a patience and respect that Amelia hadn't experienced since entering the mansion. They talked about fabrics and cuts, about Amelia's life as a teacher and the practical clothing she'd needed. Simone made notes, asked questions, and treated Amelia like a person instead of an object to be dressed and displayed. You have good instincts, Simone said, reviewing her notes. You know what works for your body. You've just never had the budget to explore it. That's a polite way of saying I'm poor, Amelia said. That's a factual way of saying you're resourceful. Simone's tone was firm. There's a difference. I'll have pieces sent over throughout the week. In the meantime, she moved to the closet and selected a deep blue dress. Wear this tonight. It'll bring out your eyes, and the cut is forgiving enough that you'll feel comfortable. Tonight? Amelia's stomach tightened. Mr. Valenti mentioned you'll be seeing him again. Simone's expression was carefully neutral. I assume you'll want to look presentable. Does everyone know? The words came out sharper than intended. About whatever arrangement this is. Simone set the dress on the bed and turned to face Amelia fully. Mrs. Valenti, everyone in this house knows something is unusual about your marriage. Mr. Valenti doesn't bring women here. He doesn't marry anyone. The fact that you're here, alive and apparently unharmed after a night in his private wing, has the entire staff gossiping. She paused. But no one knows details, and those of us who value our positions don't ask questions. What happened to the last one? The question burst out before Amelia could stop it. The maid last night said something about a previous woman. Simone's face went carefully blank. I can't discuss that. Can't or won't? Both. Simone picked up her tablet. I'll see myself out. The dress is for tonight. There are shoes in the closet that will match. And Mrs. Valenti? She paused at the door. Whatever you think you're walking into tonight, remember that you walked out of it this morning. That's more than some can say. She left, and Amelia was alone again with her thoughts and the blue dress that cost more than a month of her old salary. The hours until nightfall crawled by with agonizing slowness. Amelia tried to read from the books lining the shelves in her room, but the words blurred together. She picked at the dinner a different maid brought, Maria, who introduced herself shyly and seemed terrified of saying the wrong thing. At 8:30, as the sun set over Central Park in streaks of orange and purple, the now familiar knock came. Mrs. Valenti. Mr. Valenti is ready for you. The same guard, she'd learned his name was Marco, stood waiting. She'd changed into the blue dress, and the way his eyebrows rose fractionally told her Simone had chosen well. Let's go, Amelia said, lifting her chin. The walk through the mansion felt different tonight. She noticed details she'd missed in yesterday's shock, the way certain hallways had cameras while others didn't, the sections of the house that felt lived in versus those that seemed purely for show. Marco led her down a different route, through a gallery lined with portraits of stern-faced men who shared Lorenzo Valenti's dark eyes and sharp features. His ancestors, she realized, generations of power and violence staring down at her. They reached the same heavy wooden door. Marco opened it without a word. Amelia stepped inside, and the door closed behind her with that same tomb-like finality. The room was arranged identically to last night, fire burning low, candles scattered, heavy shadows pooling in every corner. But tonight, she was prepared. Tonight, she'd had all day to build her armor. You wore blue, the voice came from the same shadowed corner near the fireplace. It suits you better than the gray you arrived in. Your stylist chose it, Amelia said, moving to the same chair she'd occupied last night. Apparently I needed improvement. Simone chose it because you have excellent eyes and no sense of your own worth. The voice was matter-of-fact. She's good at seeing potential in people who've been taught to see themselves as failures. Amelia's hands clenched in her lap. You wanted me to tell you why they called me worthless. I did. A pause. But I'm realizing that was cruel. You don't know me well enough yet to trust that I'm actually asking, not mocking. Does it make a difference? I'm here either way. It makes a difference to me. The shadow shifted. Let's start differently. Tell me about teaching. You said you were a substitute. The change in topic threw her. What do you want to know? Why teaching? Why children? Amelia settled back in the chair, her eyes fixed on the fire. Talking about her students felt safer than talking about herself. Because children don't lie about who you are to them. If they like you, they show it. If they don't, you know immediately. There's no performance, no pretending, just honesty. You value honesty. I value knowing where I stand. She turned toward the shadows. Which is why I'm asking you directly. What is this? Why am I here telling you stories instead of... She couldn't finish the sentence. Instead of what? The voice was gentle. What did you think would happen to you here, Amelia? The use of her first name sent a strange shiver through her. I thought you'd hurt me. Use me. I thought this was about punishment or power or, I don't know, something violent. And when I asked for stories instead, I thought it was a game. A way to make me lower my guard before the real horror started. She met the darkness where she thought his eyes might be. Is it? Silence stretched between them, broken only by the pop and crackle of the fire. When he finally spoke, his voice was rougher, weighted with something she couldn't identify. No, it's not a game. I have no interest in hurting you, Amelia. I have no interest in using your body or breaking your spirit or any of the things you've clearly been imagining. I married you for protection, not pleasure. Protection from what? From loneliness. The admission came quietly. From the parts of myself that are dangerous when left alone too long. From becoming the complete monster everyone already believes I am. Amelia's breath caught. I don't understand. You will. Eventually. He shifted in the shadows, and she caught another glimpse of that pale hand. For now, tell me about the children you taught. Tell me about the ones who needed you most. So she did. She talked about Marcus, the second grader with the stutter who bloomed when she gave him books about dragons. About Lily, who came to school hungry and left with crackers Amelia bought with her own money. About the classroom where she'd been substitute for 3 months straight, where the kids started calling her Miss Hart instead of just the sub, where she'd felt like she was finally making a difference. Until the permanent teacher came back, she finished, and I was invisible again. You're angry about that. I'm tired of it. The words came out sharp, honest. I'm tired of being temporary, replaceable, the person who fills gaps until someone better comes along. Is that why you didn't fight the marriage? Because you thought you had nothing worth fighting for? The question cut deep. Amelia's hands twisted in the blue fabric of her dress. I fought. I asked my father to give me time to help with the debt another way. I asked my mother to consider other options. She laughed bitterly. I asked Sophie to speak up, to tell them she could handle this instead of me. No one listened. Because they didn't value you. Because I'm broken. The admission tore out of her. Because 5 years ago, I was in a car accident that destroyed any chance I had of having children, and my mother decided that made me worthless. Because Sophie is beautiful and whole and has a future, and I'm just the spare daughter, the one they could afford to lose. The silence that followed felt heavy, weighted with judgment she was bracing herself to receive. Do you believe that? The voice finally asked. That you're worthless because you can't bear children? It doesn't matter what I believe. It's what everyone else believes. It matters to me. The shadow moved closer, still hidden, but near enough now that Amelia could sense his presence like heat from the fire. I want to know what you think about yourself, not what small-minded people projected onto you. I think, Amelia's voice cracked. She steadied it. I think I spent my whole life trying to be enough. Smart enough, helpful enough, good enough. And no matter what I did, I was still the daughter they were relieved to get rid of. Tell me about the accident. The command was soft but unmistakable. Amelia found herself obeying, the story spilling out like poison she'd been holding in too long. I was 23, driving home for my college graduation. My parents didn't come. They couldn't afford to miss work, they said. So I drove alone, in a car that probably shouldn't have been on the road, and I was so focused on not crying that I didn't see the truck run the red light. She closed her eyes, remembering the impact, the sound of metal screaming. I woke up in the hospital 3 days later. The doctor said I was lucky to be alive. My mother said I was unlucky to survive as damaged goods. She said that to you? The voice had gone cold. Your mother said those words? Not directly, but I heard her on the phone with my aunt, talking about how the internal injuries meant I'd never have children, how no decent man would want me now, how at least Sophie was still perfect. Amelia opened her eyes, staring at the fire through a blur of tears she refused to let fall. I spent 5 years proving her wrong, getting my teaching certificate, building a life, trying to show that I had value beyond my reproductive system. And then my father gambled away money he didn't have, Sophie caught the wrong man's attention, and suddenly I was valuable again, as currency. You're angry. I'm furious. The admission felt like breaking open. I'm furious that my family sold me. I'm furious that I let them. I'm furious that I'm sitting here in a dress that costs more than I made in a month, in a mansion I'll never belong in, talking to a man I can't even see, and the angriest part is that this is still better than being invisible in my own family. The words hung in the air between them, raw and honest and terrible. Good, the voice said. Good? Amelia turned toward the shadows, stunned. Anger is honest. Anger means you haven't given up. The figure shifted, and for the first time she saw more than just a hand. A silhouette, tall and broad-shouldered, standing just beyond the reach of the firelight. Your family saw you as worthless because they measured worth in the wrong currency. You're educated, resilient, capable of surviving profound loss and still showing up every day to care for other people's children. That's not worthless, Amelia. That's remarkable. The unexpected validation hit her like a physical force. She couldn't speak, couldn't process the idea that this stranger in the dark saw value her own family had missed. Why do you care? She finally managed. Why does it matter to you what I think about myself? Because I spend every night alone in this room, trapped by circumstances you can't imagine yet, listening to the darkness and wondering if I've become the monster everyone fears. And then you walked in here yesterday, terrified and brave and honest, and you talked until dawn without pretending to be anything other than what you are. A woman who's been hurt, but hasn't let it destroy her humanity. He paused. That's rare. That's valuable. And yes, I care about whether you recognize that value. Because if you don't, you'll let this place break you the way it's broken everything else. Amelia's heart was hammering. What are you? We're not ready for that conversation yet. When will we be? When you trust me enough not to run screaming when you learn the truth. There was dark humor in his tone. We're not there yet. You keep talking about truth and trust, but you won't even let me see your face. My face is the least of what I'm hiding. The silhouette moved back into deeper shadow. But you're right. It's not fair to demand your honesty while offering none of my own. So here's the truth for you. I married you because I'm cursed. The word hung in the air like a challenge. Amelia waited, her journalist instincts from her college newspaper days kicking in. Don't interrupt. Let him fill the silence. My family has carried this curse for generations, he continued. It divides me, makes me two different versions of myself, split between day and night. The man who runs the Valenti empire by day, and the creature who hides in darkness every night. I needed a wife for appearances, for the business side of my life, but I also needed someone who could survive the nights. Someone disposable enough that her disappearance wouldn't cause problems if things went wrong. You mean someone worthless, Amelia said flatly. I mean someone the world wouldn't miss if I lost control. His voice was heavy with self-loathing. I won't apologize for the calculation, Amelia. I chose you because your family had already decided you didn't matter. That made you safe to risk. The brutal honesty should have hurt. Instead, it felt almost refreshing after a lifetime of polite lies. And if you lose control, she asked, what happens to me? I don't know. That's the terrifying truth. I don't know what I'm capable of in the darkest hours. That's why I need you to talk. Your voice, it anchors me, keeps me human, reminds me that I'm not just the monster the curse wants me to be. Amelia processed this, her mind spinning. Curses weren't real. They were fairy tale nonsense, superstition, the stuff of stories she'd told children. But the conviction in his voice was absolute. He believed it. And belief, she knew from teaching, was powerful whether the thing believed in was real or not. "Tell me about the curse," she said. "Not tonight." He sounded tired suddenly, drained. "Tonight, I want to hear more about you. Tell me about the person you were before the accident, before your family convinced you that you were broken." So she did. She talked about the girl who had devoured books from the library, who'd written terrible poetry in spiral notebooks, who'd believed she could teach her way into mattering. She talked about her favorite students, her worst classroom disasters, the tiny moments of connection that had made the struggle feel worthwhile. And as she talked, she became aware of something unexpected. He was listening, not just waiting for his turn to speak, not just passing time, actually listening with an attention that felt like being seen for the first time in years. "You should have been more than a substitute," he said when she finally ran out of words. "You should have had your own classroom, your own students, the security of knowing you belong somewhere." "Should have doesn't matter much now. It matters to me. You were wasted on people who couldn't see your value." He moved in the shadows, restless. "How much do you know about my organization?" The change in topic made her blink. "Just what everyone knows. That you run half of New York's underground, that people who cross you disappear, that even the police won't touch you. All true. I built an empire on fear and violence and calculated ruthlessness. I've done things that would justify every terrible thing you've imagined about me." His voice was flat, matter of fact. "But I've also built schools in neighborhoods the city forgot, funded hospitals that serve people who can't afford care, protected businesses from predators worse than me. Does that surprise you?" "Yes," Amelia admitted. "Good. It should. I'm not looking for redemption or forgiveness. I'm telling you this so you understand that I know the difference between using people and valuing them. And despite the calculation that brought you here, despite buying you like property, I'm choosing to value you, your intelligence, your honesty, your voice in the dark." "Why?" The question came out as barely a whisper. "Because everyone else in my life wants something from me. Power, money, protection, fear. You're the only person in this mansion who's here because you had no choice. That makes you the only person I can trust, to be honest." The logic was twisted, but Amelia understood it. She'd spent her whole life around people who pretended. Her parents pretending they valued her, her sister pretending to love her, colleagues pretending she was part of the team. At least Lorenzo Valenti was honest about his manipulation. "The sun will rise soon," he said, and Amelia realized with shock that the windows were indeed showing the first hints of gray dawn. "You should rest." "Wait." She stood quickly. "Can I ask you something?" "Ask." "Well, last night you said your voice was better than you expected. Did you choose me based on my voice?" A pause. Then quietly, "I heard you once, 3 months ago. You were reading to children in a school library in Brooklyn, one of the schools I fund. I was there for a meeting with the principal, and I heard you through an open door. You were reading Where the Wild Things Are, and the children were completely silent, completely captivated. Your voice made that story come alive." He paused. "I remembered. When Vincent said your family was offering a daughter, I asked if it was the teacher, the one with the voice that could hold a room full of children spellbound. He said yes. So I chose you." Amelia's breath caught. "You chose me specifically?" "I did. Not because you were worthless, because your voice was worth something to me. Worth everything, actually. Though I didn't explain that to Vincent." Another pause. "I let you believe you were the expendable sister because I needed you desperate enough to agree. I'm sorry for that deception." The revelation spun through her mind, reframing everything. He'd chosen her, not as a consolation prize, not as the backup option, but as the specific woman he wanted, because of something she'd never even known anyone noticed. "I don't know what to do with that information," she said honestly. "You don't have to do anything with it. Just know that you were never worthless to me. Convenient, yes. Useful, absolutely. But never worthless." The shadow moved toward the door. "Go rest, Amelia. Same time tomorrow night. What should I talk about tomorrow? Anything you want. Yourself, the world, fairy tales, philosophy. I just need to hear your voice." A pause. "And Amelia, Thank you for telling me about the accident. I know that wasn't easy. The door opened and Marco was waiting. Amelia walked out on shaking legs, her mind reeling with everything she'd learned and everything she still didn't understand. Back in her room, she collapsed onto the bed as dawn painted the sky in shades of gold and rose. She should have been exhausted, but her mind was racing. Lorenzo Valenti had heard her read to children and decided she was worth marrying. He claimed to be cursed, to need her voice as an anchor to his humanity. He'd admitted to building an empire on violence while also funding schools and hospitals. Nothing about him made sense. Nothing about this situation made sense. And yet, for the first time since her family had handed her that marriage certificate, Amelia felt something other than despair. She felt curious. The days developed a rhythm. Amelia slept until early afternoon, woke to find meals waiting, and spent the hours before nightfall exploring the parts of the mansion she was permitted to access. Simone returned with new clothing that actually reflected Amelia's taste. Rich jewel tones, comfortable fabrics, pieces that made her feel like herself, instead of a paper doll being dressed by strangers. The staff remained cool and distant, with the exception of Maria, who seemed both fascinated and terrified by Amelia's presence. Mrs. Chen watched her with barely concealed disapproval, as if waiting for Amelia to make a mistake that would justify removing her. But the nights belonged to Lorenzo and their strange, intimate conversations in the dark. Each evening, Marco led her to that shadowed room. Each night, Lorenzo remained hidden in darkness, his voice her only connection to the man she'd married. And each dawn, Amelia left with more questions than answers, but also with a growing sense that she was beginning to understand the monster everyone feared. He asked her about books, and they spent 3 hours debating the merits of classic literature versus modern fiction. He asked about her childhood, and she told him about growing up invisible in a house full of people who looked through her. He asked about her dreams, and she admitted she'd stopped having them after the accident. "That's the real tragedy," he said that night. "Not what was taken from you, but what you stopped allowing yourself to want." In return, he offered pieces of himself. He told her about building his empire from ashes, about the violence required to hold power in a world that respected nothing else. He spoke about the curse with a matter-of-factness that was almost more unsettling than if he'd been dramatic about it. "My family has carried this for 8 generations, he explained one night. "A punishment for crimes my ancestor committed. It splits me, makes me 2 different versions of myself. The human who operates by day and the creature who exists by night." "What kind of creature?" Amelia asked. "The kind you're not ready to see yet." His voice was gentle but firm. "Trust me on this, Amelia. When the time comes, I'll show you, but not until you're ready to handle the truth without running." On the 7th night, Amelia arrived to find the room arranged differently. A second chair had been pulled closer to the fire, and a small table between them held a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. "I thought you might like something to drink," Lorenzo said from the shadows. "Talking for hours is thirsty work." Amelia settled into her usual chair and watched as a pale hand emerged from the darkness, pouring wine into both glasses. Long fingers, she noticed again. Elegant, human. "Thank you," she said, taking the glass he slid across the table toward her. "You're welcome." A pause. "You've been here a week. How are you finding your new life?" "Surreal. Confusing. Surprisingly not terrible." She sipped the wine, expensive, of course, and delicious. "The staff hates me. They're afraid of what you represent. Change, uncertainty, the unknown variable in a house that runs on routine and hierarchy." "What do I represent to you?" The question hung in the air. Amelia could feel him considering it, weighing his words. "Hope," he finally said. "The possibility that I might be something other than what the curse demands, that I might maintain enough humanity to deserve mercy when this is all over." "When what is all over?" "The curse, my life, the empire, all of it." He sounded tired. "Everything ends eventually, Amelia. I'm just trying to ensure that when I end, I'll have been more than just the monster." "You keep calling yourself that, but monsters don't fund schools or ask about someone's favorite books or apologize for deception. Don't they?" Dark amusement colored his voice. "Or are those just the things monsters do when they want something from you?" "What do you want from me? Really?" "I told you, your voice, your presence, your honesty. A pause. Your willingness to see me as something other than just the fear everyone else carries. Amelia set down her wine glass and leaned forward, staring into the shadows where she knew he was. Then let me see you. If you want me to see you as something other than a monster, let me actually see you. Not yet. Why not? Because you're already braver than you realize, and I won't risk breaking that courage by revealing what I am before you're strong enough to handle it. His voice softened. Ask me again in a week. If you still want to see me, if you still believe I'm worth seeing, I'll show you. I promise. It wasn't the answer she wanted, but it was honest. Amelia settled back in her chair. Then tell me what happens during the day, she said. You said the curse splits you. What's the other version like? Cold, calculating, completely focused on maintaining power and control. He paused. That version of me remembers these conversations, but doesn't feel them the same way. He knows you exist, knows the arrangement, but doesn't have the same connection to your voice. During the day, you're a strategic asset. At night, you're... He stopped. I'm what? The only real thing in my world. The admission came quietly. Everything else is manipulation, strategy, fear, power. But when you walk through that door each night and start talking, you're just yourself. Honest and real and present. That's more valuable than you know. Amelia's chest tightened. I don't know how to respond to that. You don't have to respond. Just keep coming back. Keep talking. Keep being exactly who you are, instead of who you think I want you to be. A sound that might have been a laugh. Though I suspect those are the same thing for you, you don't know how to be anyone but yourself. Is that a compliment? It's an observation, and yes, a compliment. You have no guile, Amelia. No performance. It's refreshing and terrifying in equal measure. They talked until dawn again, the conversation ranging from philosophy to favorite foods to the exact right way to make coffee. When gray light finally crept through the heavy curtains, Amelia felt the now familiar reluctance to leave. Same time tomorrow, she asked, standing. Always. A pause. Sleep well, Amelia, and thank you for another night of your voice. As she walked back through the silent mansion with Marco, Amelia realized something that should have frightened her. She was beginning to look forward to the nights, beginning to crave those hours of honest conversation in the dark, beginning to wonder what it would be like to see the face that belonged to that voice. She was beginning to care about the monster in the shadows, and that, she suspected, was exactly what he'd been counting on. The realization that she cared should have terrified her. Instead, it settled into Amelia's chest like a slow-burning ember, warming parts of herself she'd thought frozen after years of being unwanted. She lay in her bed as dawn broke over Manhattan, staring at the ornate ceiling and wondering when exactly the nightly conversations had stopped being an obligation and started being the only hours of her day that felt real. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, the first time it had made a sound since she'd arrived at the mansion. She'd kept it charged out of habit, but hadn't expected anyone to actually contact her. The screen showed her mother's number. Amelia stared at it until the buzzing stopped. Then it started again immediately. On the third call, she answered. Amelia, thank God. Patricia's voice was breathless, relieved. We've been trying to reach you for days. Why haven't you called? Are you all right? Has he hurt you? The concern felt performative. Too late. I'm fine. Fine, that's all you have to say. We've been worried sick. Have you? Amelia cut her off, surprised by the coldness in her own voice. Or have you just been worried that your deal might fall through? Silence. Then Patricia's tone shifted, defensive. That's not fair. We did what we had to do to protect this family, to protect Sophie. You sold me to protect Sophie. Let's be honest about what happened. Amelia, please. Her mother's voice cracked. I know you're angry. You have every right to be angry. But you have to understand we had no choice. The debt was real. The threats were real. And when they said they wanted one of you, what were we supposed to do? You were supposed to tell them no. You were supposed to protect both your daughters, not choose which one was worth keeping. Amelia sat up, gripping the phone tighter. But that would have required you to see me as worth protecting, and we both know you stopped doing that the day the doctors told you I couldn't have children. That's not true. But Patricia's protest was weak, unconvincing. Then tell me, Mom, Tell me one time in the last 5 years that you looked at me and saw anything other than a disappointment. One time you introduced me to your friends without that apologetic tone. One time you didn't compare me to Sophie and find me lacking. The silence stretched long enough that Amelia thought her mother might have hung up. Then, quietly, "How is it? The marriage? Is he treating you well?" The question was so absurd that Amelia almost laughed. Her mother had sold her to a man rumored to be a monster, and now wanted to know if he was treating her well. "He doesn't hit me, if that's what you're asking. He doesn't force himself on me. He actually talks to me like I'm a person instead of property." The words came out sharp, precise. "Which is more than I can say for my own family." "Amelia, please don't be like this. We're still your family. We still love you." "You have a strange way of showing love." Amelia stood, pacing to the window. The city was waking up below, cars beginning to fill the streets, lights coming on in apartments, normal people living normal lives. "I need to go." "Wait, at least tell us when we can see you. Sophie wants to apologize properly. Your father wants to—" "I don't care what Sophie wants. I don't care what Dad wants. You made your choice when you handed me that marriage certificate. I'm making mine now by not letting you back into my life." She paused, something bitter rising in her throat. "Tell Sophie I hope she sleeps well at night, knowing what her freedom cost." She hung up before her mother could respond, then turned off the phone completely. Her hands were shaking with adrenaline and something that felt like grief, but cleaner. Clearer. She'd finally said the words she'd been swallowing for 5 years, and it felt like breaking open and healing simultaneously. A knock at the door interrupted her spiral of thoughts. Maria entered with breakfast, her young face creased with concern. "Mrs. Valenti, are you all right? I heard raised voices." "I'm fine, Maria. Just dealing with family." Amelia managed a smile. "Thank you for breakfast." Maria set the tray down but didn't leave immediately. She fidgeted with her apron, clearly wanting to say something. "What is it?" Amelia asked gently. "It's just the staff has been talking about you and Mr. Valenti." Maria's voice dropped to a whisper. "They say you spend every night with him and come out unharmed. They say he talks to you, actually talks, like a conversation. Is that so unusual?" "Mr. Valenti doesn't talk to anyone. Not really. He gives orders, makes demands, conducts business, but he doesn't have conversations." Maria looked at Amelia with something like awe. "Whatever you're doing, Mrs. Valenti, it's working. The house feels different, less heavy." Before Amelia could ask what that meant, Maria hurried out, leaving her alone with her breakfast and her thoughts. The house feels different. What did that mean? What could possibly change in a mansion this size just because Amelia was having nightly conversations with its owner? She spent the afternoon in the mansion's library, a room she'd discovered on her 3rd day, filled floor to ceiling with books in multiple languages. Someone had exquisite taste in literature. She'd been working her way through the fiction section, looking for something to discuss with Lorenzo that night. She was reaching for a worn copy of Jane Eyre when a voice behind her made her jump. "That's one of his favorites." Amelia spun to find Vincent Calabrese standing in the doorway, his expensive suit as immaculate as ever. She hadn't seen him since the night he delivered her to the mansion. "Mr. Calabrese." "Vincent, please." He moved into the library, his gaze sweeping over the shelves with familiarity. "I see you've found Lorenzo's sanctuary. He spent most of his childhood in this room, hiding from a world that didn't understand him. You've known him a long time. Since we were boys, his father and mine did business together." Vincent pulled a book from a shelf, examined it, replaced it. "I'm probably the closest thing he has to a friend, though I suspect that's not saying much." Amelia studied him, this polished man who served a monster. "Why are you here?" "To check on you, to ensure the arrangement is working as intended." His gaze settled on her, assessing. "You look well? Better than when you arrived, actually." "I'm sleeping in a mansion and eating food I don't have to cook myself. It's not exactly hardship." "Isn't it?" Vincent's expression was knowing. "You were sold by your family, married to a man you'd never met, brought to live in a house full of people who see you as an outsider. Most women would be falling apart. You're reading Jane Eyre. What else should I be doing? Running, begging to go home, demanding to know what's happening to you. Vincent moved closer. But you're not doing any of those things. You're adapting, which tells me either you're very good at survival or you're finding reasons to stay. The observation hit too close to truth. Amelia straightened her shoulders. I don't have anywhere else to go. Don't you? Your family would take you back in a heartbeat if you wanted to leave. The marriage can be annulled. Lorenzo wouldn't stop you. Vincent tilted his head. But you haven't asked to leave, haven't even tried. Why? Maybe I'm afraid of what he'd do if I tried. No. Vincent's smile was slight, knowing. You're not afraid of him anymore. I can see it in the way you carry yourself. Something's changed. So I'll ask again. Why are you staying? Amelia met his gaze directly. Maybe because, for the first time in my life, someone actually listens when I speak. Maybe because the monster everyone fears treats me with more respect than my own family did. Or maybe I'm just curious to see how this story ends. Curious. Vincent's smile widened. That's dangerous, Mrs. Valenti. Curiosity about Lorenzo tends to lead to complications. Is that a warning? It's an observation from someone who's watched him for 30 years. Vincent pulled out his phone, checked something, put it away. He's different with you. The daytime version of him, I mean. He asks about you, wants to know if you're being treated well, if you have everything you need. That's unprecedented. You know about the curse. It wasn't a question. I know everything about Lorenzo, including the curse, the split, the danger he poses to himself and others. Vincent's expression turned serious, which is why I'm here to tell you this. Whatever is developing between you two, be careful. The nighttime Lorenzo may value your voice and your presence, but the daytime version is still the man who built an empire on violence. Don't confuse gentleness in the dark for safety in the light. Has he asked you to warn me? He's asked me to ensure you're comfortable. I'm choosing to interpret that broadly. Vincent moved toward the door. One more thing. There's a gala in 2 weeks, the annual Valenti Foundation fundraiser. Lorenzo will need you to attend as his wife. The daytime version will need you to play a role. Can you do that? Amelia thought about the shadow man who asked about her favorite books and the ruthless crime boss who apparently ran legitimate charities. 2 versions of the same man. What role exactly? The devoted wife, the woman who chose him despite his reputation. The proof that Lorenzo Valenti is more than just the devil of New York's underworld. Vincent's smile was sympathetic. I know it's asking a lot, but it's important to his business interests, to maintaining the facade that keeps certain authorities from looking too closely at his operations. I'll do it. The words came out before Amelia fully thought them through, but she meant them. On one condition. Name it. I want to see him, the daytime version, before the gala. She lifted her chin. If I'm going to pretend to be his devoted wife in public, I need to know what he's like when he's not hidden in shadows. Vincent's eyebrows rose. That's bold and potentially dangerous. The daytime Lorenzo isn't the same man you've been talking to at night. I don't care. I need to see him. Both versions. I need to understand what I'm dealing with. Amelia held Vincent's gaze. Can you arrange it? I can ask, but don't be surprised if he refuses. Vincent studied her with new interest. You're braver than you look, Mrs. Valenti, or more foolish. I haven't decided which. Maybe both. Maybe both, Vincent agreed. He headed for the door, then paused. For what it's worth, I hope this works out. Lorenzo deserves something other than the darkness. And you deserve better than being invisible to the people who should have loved you most. He left, and Amelia was alone with the books and her racing thoughts. In 2 weeks, she'd have to appear in public as Lorenzo Valenti's wife. She'd have to face society, the press, people who knew exactly what the Valenti name meant and would judge her accordingly. But more immediately, she'd asked to meet the daytime version of the man she was married to, the cold, calculating crime boss who remembered their conversations but didn't feel them the same way. What had she just done? That night, when Marco came to escort her to Lorenzo's room, Amelia's nerves were singing with anticipation and anxiety. She'd spent the day second-guessing her request to Vincent, wondering if she'd pushed too far too fast. But when she entered the shadowed room and settled into her chair by the fire, Lorenzo's voice held warmth instead of anger. Vincent tells me you want to meet my other half. Amelia's breath caught. He told you. Of course he told me. He tells me everything. A pause. Why do you want to meet him? You know he's not the same as this version of me. Because if I'm going to attend a gala as your wife, I need to know what you're like when you're not. She gestured at the shadows. When you're not this. When I'm not vulnerable and hidden and desperate for your voice. There was wry humor in his tone. When I'm the man who everyone fears? Yes. Silence. She could hear him breathing in the darkness, could sense him weighing her request. If you meet him, you might not want to come back here at night, he finally said. The daytime version can be cruel, dismissive. Everything you've been running from in your family, concentrated into one person who has the power to actually hurt you. Then why do you want me to meet him? I don't. The admission came quietly. I want to keep you here in this room where you only know this version of me, where you talk to me like I'm human instead of monstrous. But that's selfish, and you deserve to understand the full scope of what you're married to before you make any decisions about staying. I've already decided to stay. The words surprised her as much as they probably surprised him. At least for now. At least until I understand what this is. What do you think this is, Amelia? She considered the question honestly. I think it's two lonely people finding unexpected connection in the dark. I think it's a man trying to hold on to his humanity by any means necessary. And I think it's me discovering that I'm worth more than my family ever acknowledged, because you see value in something as simple as my voice. It's not simple. His voice was rough with emotion. Your voice is everything. It's the difference between remaining human and becoming completely lost to the darkness. Don't underestimate what you mean to me, even if I can't show you my face yet. Then let me see you tomorrow. In daylight. The other version. Amelia leaned forward in her chair. I promise I'll come back tomorrow night, no matter what happens during the day. I just need to see all of you, not just the parts you think I can handle. More silence, then with a sigh that sounded like surrender. All right. Tomorrow at noon, Vincent will bring you to my office, but Amelia, his voice hardened, don't expect gentleness. Don't expect the connection we have here. The daytime version knows you exist and knows your value, but he doesn't feel it the same way. He'll look at you as a strategic asset, not as the woman whose voice keeps him anchored. Can you handle that? I survived my mother telling me I was damaged goods. I can handle one meeting with a crime boss who doesn't feel things the same way at night. She tried to sound confident, even though her heart was hammering. We'll see. A pause. In the meantime, tell me what you were reading today. Vincent said he found you in the library. So she told him about Jane Eyre, about the parallels she'd noticed between Bronte's Gothic romance and her own strange situation. They talked about literature and loneliness, about the courage it took to love someone the world called monstrous, about whether redemption was possible for people who'd done terrible things. Do you think I can be redeemed? Lorenzo asked as dawn approached. I think you're trying to be more than what you were made to be, Amelia said carefully. Whether that's redemption or just survival, I'm not qualified to judge. That's a diplomatic answer. It's an honest one. I don't know enough about what you've done or why you've done it to make moral pronouncements. All I know is that you treat me better than my family did, and you're honest about your darkness instead of pretending it doesn't exist. That has to count for something. It counts for more than you know. His voice was soft, almost vulnerable. Get some rest, Amelia. Tomorrow will be difficult. And tomorrow night, after you've met him, we'll talk about whether you still want to continue this arrangement. I'll be here, she promised. I hope so. More than I should. I hope so. Amelia barely slept that morning. She kept imagining the meeting, building scenarios in her mind of what the daytime Lorenzo would be like. Would he look like she imagined? Would his eyes be as cold as his reputation suggested? Would he be disappointed in her, this woman who'd been presented as worthless? At 11:30, Simone appeared with a different kind of outfit than usual, a sharp charcoal suit that fit Amelia perfectly, with a silk blouse in deep crimson. Professional, powerful, armor disguised as fashion. Mr. Calabrese requested this specifically, Simone said, helping Amelia into the jacket. He said you'd need to look like you belong in Mr. Valenti's office. How do I look? Like a woman who knows her worth. Simone smiled. which is exactly the right look for meeting a man who built his empire on reading people's weaknesses. Don't let him see fear. He respects strength. At precisely noon, Vincent appeared at her door. "Ready?" he asked. "No," Amelia thought. "Yes," she said. They walked through parts of the mansion Amelia had never seen, down a private elevator, through a corridor lined with security that made the rest of the house look casual by comparison, to a set of double doors that radiated authority. Vincent knocked once, then opened the door without waiting for a response. "Sir, Mrs. Valenti is here." "Send her in." The voice was familiar and completely different simultaneously. The same depth, the same slight accent, but colder, flatter, devoid of the warmth Amelia had grown accustomed to in the dark. She stepped into an office that looked like it belonged to a Fortune 500 CEO, not a crime boss. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, sleek furniture in dark wood and leather, artwork that probably cost more than most people made in a lifetime. And behind a massive desk, illuminated by the harsh light of noon, sat Lorenzo Valenti. Amelia's breath caught. He was beautiful in a way that made her heart clench and her stomach drop simultaneously. Sharp features that looked carved from marble, dark hair threaded with silver at the temples, broad shoulders in an impeccably tailored suit. But it was his eyes that struck her, gray as storm clouds, calculating and cold, assessing her with the same detachment someone might use to evaluate a piece of furniture. This was the monster everyone feared. This was the man who'd built an empire on violence and ruthlessness. This was her husband. "Sit," he said, gesturing to one of the chairs across from his desk. Amelia sat, grateful for Simone's advice about looking strong. She lifted her chin and met his gaze directly, refusing to be intimidated. Lorenzo leaned back in his chair, studying her with those cold gray eyes. "Vincent says you requested this meeting. Why?" "Because there's a gala in 2 weeks where I'll need to appear as your wife, and I needed to see you before pretending to be devoted to someone I'd never actually met in the light." Her voice was steady. "Good. Practical." A slight smile touched his lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. "And honest. That tracks with what I've heard about you." "What have you heard?" "That you show up every night without complaint, that you talk until dawn without asking for anything in return, that you're smarter than your family gave you credit for, and braver than you probably realize." He tapped his fingers on the desk. "The night version tells me things about our conversations. I remember them, but differently, like watching a movie instead of living an experience." "Vincent said you were different during the day." "I am. At night, I'm vulnerable, desperate, clinging to humanity through whatever connection I can find. During the day, I'm what I need to be to maintain this empire." His gaze sharpened. "Which version do you prefer?" It was a test. Amelia recognized it immediately. "I don't know you well enough to have a preference. I've spent 2 weeks talking to a voice in the dark. This is the first time I'm seeing your face." "And what do you think of my face?" The question was delivered with clinical interest, as if he were asking her opinion on wallpaper. Amelia refused to flinch. "I think you're exactly as dangerous as everyone says you are. I think those eyes have watched terrible things without blinking. And I think you use your appearance as a weapon the same way you use everything else, with calculated precision." She paused. "But I also think there's something broken behind all that control, or you wouldn't need my voice every night to stay human." The silence that followed felt electric. Lorenzo's expression didn't change, but something flickered in those gray eyes. Surprise, maybe, or respect. "You're braver than I expected," he said finally. "Most people don't speak to me that honestly. Most people haven't been sold by their family and married to you overnight. I'm already living in the worst-case scenario. What do I have to lose by being honest? Your life, your comfort, your continued safety in this house." But there was no threat in his voice, just statement of fact. "Though you're right that honesty is what I value most. The night version has told you that repeatedly." "He has." Amelia leaned forward slightly. "Can I ask you something?" "Ask." "Do you remember what we talked about last night?" "I remember every word. I remember you comparing our situation to Jane Eyre. I remember you saying you thought I was trying to be more than what I was made to be." His gaze was unwavering. "I remember all of it. I just don't feel it the same way. What do you feel? Appreciation for a useful asset, respect for your resilience, mild curiosity about whether you'll continue this arrangement after meeting the full scope of what you've married. He stood, moving to the window with the fluid grace of a predator. But I don't feel the connection. The desperate need for your voice. The fear that you might not return. That's all the night version. Amelia stood as well, moving to stand beside him at the window. Up close, he was even more imposing, easily 6'3", with the kind of presence that made the air feel thinner. Vincent said you ask about me, during the day. I do. Because the night version cares whether you're happy, and I'm not foolish enough to damage something he needs to survive. Lorenzo glanced at her. You're important to my other half. That makes you important to me, even if I don't feel it personally. That's the most clinical declaration of value I've ever received. Would you prefer I lie and pretend I feel things I don't? His tone sharpened slightly. I'm offering you honesty, Mrs. Valenti. During the day, I'm a businessman and a strategist. I see value in keeping you comfortable and safe because losing you would destroy the night version, and I need him functional. It's not romantic, but it's real. Amelia processed this, staring out at Central Park below. What about the gala? What do you need from me there? I need you to play the role of my wife. Devoted, but not fawning. Confident, but not challenging. Proof that I'm human enough to sustain a relationship, civilized enough to deserve a place in high society. He turned to face her fully. Can you do that? I can, but I have conditions. His eyebrows rose fractionally. Bold. What conditions? 1. I want access to the library without restrictions. 2. I want the staff to treat me with basic respect instead of like an intruder. 3. I want to know what happened to the woman before me. Lorenzo was silent for a long moment, those gray eyes assessing her with new intensity. The library is already yours. I'll speak to Mrs. Chen about the staff, but the third request, he paused. That's dangerous information. I deserve to know what I'm walking into. If something happened to her, I need to understand why. There was no woman before you, not in the way you're thinking. Lorenzo moved back to his desk, leaning against it. The night version has been alone for 3 years. Before that, there were attempts. People who tried to fill the role you're filling now. None of them lasted more than a few nights. What happened to them? They ran. Or I sent them away when it became clear they couldn't handle what I am. His voice was matter-of-fact. You're the first one who's made it past 2 weeks. The first one who comes back voluntarily every night. The first one who actually talks, instead of just enduring the hours in terrified silence. Amelia absorbed this information. When you say what you are, you mean the curse. I mean the physical manifestation of it, the way I change when the sun sets. Lorenzo's expression remained neutral, but she caught something in his eyes. A flicker of the vulnerability she'd heard in his night voice. The night version won't show you yet because he's afraid you'll react the same way the others did, but you'll see eventually. At the gala, when the sun sets, you'll understand what I really am. Will you hurt me when you change? No. The curse doesn't make me violent toward you. It makes me other, different, something that doesn't quite fit human categories. He crossed his arms. But it frightens people, repulses them, and the night version can't survive being looked at with fear and disgust by the one person who's supposed to anchor him to humanity. The raw honesty of it struck her. Even in his cold, calculating daytime state, Lorenzo was trying to protect the more vulnerable version of himself. I won't run, Amelia said quietly. When I see what you become, I won't run. You say that now. Everyone says that. Lorenzo pushed off from the desk. Our meeting is concluded, Mrs. Valenti. Vincent will escort you back to your quarters. I'll see you at the gala in 2 weeks. Try to look devoted. It was a dismissal, clear and final. But Amelia didn't move immediately. Thank you, she said, for being honest about what you feel and don't feel, for explaining the difference between your two halves, for not pretending to be something you're not. Something flickered across his expression. Surprise again, or maybe something softer. You're welcome. Now go before I remember all the reasons this arrangement is a terrible idea. Amelia left with Vincent, her mind reeling from the encounter. The daytime Lorenzo was everything the nighttime version had warned her about, cold, calculating, dangerous. But he was also honest in his own way, and he protected the vulnerable version of himself with fierce determination. Two men in one body, two versions of the same cursed soul, and she'd just promised both of them that she wouldn't run. That night, when she entered the shadowed room, Lorenzo's voice held a question. "Well, did you meet him?" "I did." Amelia settled into her chair, relief washing over her at being back in the familiar darkness. "He's terrifying. I warned you. He's also honest, and he cares about you, the night version of you, even if he doesn't feel it the same way." She paused. "He told me about the others, the ones who ran." Silence. Then quietly, "I didn't want you to know about them. Didn't want you to think you were just another in a line of failed attempts. I don't think that. I think I'm the first one who actually wanted to stay." Amelia leaned forward in her chair. "And I meant what I told him. When I see what you become, I won't run." "You can't promise that." "Yes, I can, because I've spent 2 weeks listening to you, talking to you, learning who you are when you're not wearing the daytime mask. Whatever the curse makes you look like physically, it doesn't change the person I've gotten to know in this room." She took a breath. "Show me. Tonight. Let me see what happens when you're not hidden in shadows." "Amelia, show me, because I'm tired of being afraid of the unknown. I'd rather face the truth and prove to both versions of you that I'm not going anywhere." The silence stretched so long that Amelia thought he might refuse. Then she heard movement, the sound of him standing. "All right," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "But remember, you asked for this." He moved toward the fireplace, and for the first time in 2 weeks, Lorenzo Valenti stepped into the light. Amelia's breath stopped as Lorenzo stepped into the firelight. The man who emerged from the shadows was the same one she'd seen that afternoon in his office. The same sharp features, the same imposing height, the same dark hair silvered at the temples. But there was something different in the way he held himself now. The rigid control from earlier had softened into something more human, more vulnerable, and his eyes, those storm-gray eyes, looked at her with an intensity that made her heart hammer against her ribs. "This is me," he said quietly, "the human form. What you saw earlier today." Amelia stood slowly, moving closer to the firelight. "I don't understand. You said the curse changes you at night." "It does, just not immediately." Lorenzo held out his hands, turning them over in the firelight. "The transformation happens gradually as the night deepens. Right now, at sunset, I'm still mostly human, but as the hours pass..." He trailed off, his jaw tightening. "You'll see." "How long do I have before the change?" "An hour, maybe 2. He met her gaze directly. "Are you sure you want to stay? You could leave now, come back at dawn when I'm fully human again, and we could pretend this never happened." Amelia stepped closer, close enough now to see the fine lines around his eyes, the slight scar on his left temple, the way his hands trembled almost imperceptibly. "I told you I wouldn't run. I meant it." Something flickered across his face, hope, fear, disbelief tangled together. "You really are remarkably brave. Or remarkably foolish." "I've been called both today." She managed a small smile. "Sit with me? If we only have an hour or 2 before the change, I'd like to actually see your face while we talk." They settled into the chairs by the fire, and for the first time, Amelia could watch his expressions as they spoke. Could see the way his eyes softened when she made him laugh, the way his mouth tightened when she touched on painful subjects, the entirely human reactions that made him seem less like a monster and more like a man carrying an impossible burden. "Tell me about the curse," she said. "The real story. Not the careful explanations you've been giving me. I want to know how this happened." Lorenzo leaned back in his chair, the firelight casting shadows across his features. "My ancestor, 8 generations back, made a deal he shouldn't have made, trafficked in things that shouldn't be trafficked, hurt people who had protection from forces older and darker than anything in the human world." His voice was matter-of-fact, but she could hear the weight of inherited shame beneath it. The curse was punishment. Every male heir in the direct line would be split, human by day, something else by night. Never whole, never entirely one thing or the other. "What did he traffic in?" "Children." The word came out flat, hard. He sold children to people who used them in ways I won't describe to you. When he was caught, when justice came for him, the curse was meant to ensure that no Valenti man would ever feel entirely human again, that we would know what it meant to be divided, fractured, incomplete. Amelia's stomach turned. That's horrible. It was. What he did was unconscionable. What the curse has done to 8 generations of men who had nothing to do with his crimes is also unconscionable. Both things can be true. Lorenzo's gaze was steady on hers. I've spent my life trying to atone for crimes I didn't commit while being punished for them anyway. It's a special kind of hell. Is that why you fund schools? Hospitals? Why you protect children through your organization? Partially. Also because I refuse to let my ancestors' legacy define me entirely. His jaw tightened. I've done terrible things, Amelia. I've hurt people, killed people, destroyed lives to maintain my power and protect my empire. I won't pretend otherwise. But I've also tried to ensure that the power I hold does some good, that children are safer in my territory than they would be without my protection. Amelia studied him, this complicated man who contained multitudes of contradiction. The daytime version said you don't feel our connection the same way, but you remember everything we talk about. I do. Every word, every story you've told, every piece of yourself you've shared. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. But during the day, it's like remembering something that happened to someone else. I know intellectually that your voice matters, that these conversations are important, but I don't feel the desperate need for them. That only comes at night. What does it feel like? The need? Lorenzo was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. Like drowning and your voice is air, like being lost in darkness and your words are light, like forgetting what it means to be human and you remind me with every sentence. He looked at her then, and the vulnerability in his eyes made her chest ache. You have no idea how close I've come, over the years, to just surrendering to the curse entirely, letting the night version take over completely, becoming more monster than man. You're the first thing in 3 years that's made me want to keep fighting. Why me? Why not someone else? Because you're honest. Because you've been broken and put yourself back together with nothing but determination and hope. Because when I heard you reading to those children, your voice had a quality I'd never heard before. Absolute presence. Like every word mattered, like the story you were telling was the most important thing in the world. He paused. I needed that. Someone who treats words, treats stories, treats communication like it has real power. Because for me, it does. Your voice has the power to keep me human. Amelia's throat tightened with emotion. I had no idea anyone was listening that day. I was just trying to keep the kids engaged until the final bell. You were doing more than that. You were giving them your complete attention, your full presence. In a world where most people are halfway somewhere else at all times, you were entirely there. Lorenzo's gaze held hers. That's what I need. Someone who shows up completely, who doesn't perform or pretend or hold back, just someone who's genuinely, entirely present. I can do that, Amelia said quietly. I am doing that. I know. That's why I'm about to show you something I've never shown anyone willingly. He glanced toward the window, where full darkness had fallen. The change is starting. You'll see it soon. Amelia's heart rate kicked up, but she kept her voice steady. What should I expect? My form will shift. Not dramatically. The curse doesn't turn me into some completely inhuman creature. But there will be changes. Physical alterations that mark me as other. His hands clenched on the arms of his chair. Most people find it disturbing, unsettling, the uncanny valley effect of something that looks almost human but isn't quite right. I've spent 2 weeks talking to you in complete darkness. Whatever you look like can't be worse than what my imagination has conjured. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. We'll see. They sat in silence, the fire crackling between them, and Amelia watched as the change began. It was subtle at first, a slight luminescence to his skin, as if he were lit from within by cold moonlight. Then his eyes began to shift, the gray darkening to something deeper, more reflective, catching the firelight like an animal's eyes in the dark. His features remained the same, but the proportions altered slightly. His fingers lengthened, the bones more prominent. His frame, already tall, seemed to expand fractionally, as if he were taking up more space than should be physically possible. But it was the presence that changed most dramatically. The air around him felt different, charged, electric, like standing too close to a storm. There was something fundamentally other about him now, something that made every instinct in Amelia's body scream that she was in the presence of a predator. And yet, his eyes, now that deep reflective gray, still held the same expression she'd seen moments before, the same vulnerability, the same desperate hope that she wouldn't recoil. Well? His voice was different too, deeper, with a resonance that seemed to vibrate in her chest. Are you running yet? Amelia stood slowly and moved to kneel in front of his chair, bringing herself to eye level with him. She reached out and took one of his transformed hands in both of hers. The skin was cooler than before, the bones beneath prominent and angular, but it was still a hand, still part of the man she'd been talking to for 2 weeks. I'm not running, she said firmly. You're different, strange, definitely outside the normal human range. But you're still you. I can see it in your eyes. Lorenzo's breath caught. He stared at her like she was something miraculous and impossible. You're not afraid. I'm terrified, Amelia corrected. Every instinct I have is telling me you're dangerous, that I should get away from the predator. But I'm choosing to trust what I know about you instead of what my hindbrain is screaming. She squeezed his hand. You've never hurt me. You've been nothing but honest with me. You value my voice, my presence, my humanity. Why would I run from someone who sees me that clearly? Because I'm a monster. You're a man with a curse that changes your physical form. That's not the same thing as being a monster. Amelia met his gaze steadily. Monsters don't fund schools. Monsters don't ask about favorite books. Monsters don't spend weeks building trust before asking someone to see them as they really are. A sound escaped him that might have been a laugh or a sob. You're going to destroy me, Amelia Hart. You're going to make me believe I deserve this, deserve you, and then reality is going to reassert itself and I'll lose everything. Or, Amelia said quietly, I'm going to stay exactly as I promised, and we'll figure out together what this arrangement becomes. Lorenzo pulled his hand from hers and stood abruptly, moving to the window. Even his movement was different now, fluid and predatory, like a big cat prowling its territory. You should know something. The gala in 2 weeks. I'll change there. In public. In front of New York's elite and my business associates and enemies who would love nothing more than to see proof that I'm less than human. What? Amelia stood, her mind racing. Why would you do that publicly? Because someone has been spreading rumors about the curse, trying to undermine my authority by suggesting I'm not fit to lead, that I'm compromised by something supernatural. He turned from the window, his transformed features grim. I need to control the narrative. Show that, yes, I change, but I'm still in control, still powerful, still someone who commands respect and fear. And you need me there as proof that you're human enough to sustain a relationship. Exactly. If my wife can stand beside me when I transform, can look at me without fear or disgust, it sends a message that the curse doesn't make me a monster, just different. His reflective eyes caught hers. But it means you'll have to stand beside me in front of hundreds of people and not flinch when everyone else is recoiling. Can you do that? Amelia thought about her mother's voice on the phone, calling her damaged goods, about Sophie's tears that had meant nothing, about a lifetime of being invisible to people who should have loved her. She thought about Lorenzo listening to her read to children and deciding she was worth marrying, about 2 weeks of conversations in the dark that had made her feel more valued than 28 years in her own family. Yes, she said, I can do that. You don't know what you're agreeing to, the scrutiny, the judgment, the way people will look at you for choosing to stay with something like me? Something like you? Amelia crossed to him, tilting her head back to meet his eyes. You're a man with a curse. A complicated, dangerous, ruthless man who also happens to care about children's literacy and hospital funding. A man who values honesty and presence and connection. Yes, you look different at night. Yes, you're intimidating as hell. But I've seen scarier things than your transformed face. Like what? Like my own mother's eyes when she looked at me after the accident and saw only disappointment. Like my father's face when he handed me that marriage certificate and wouldn't meet my gaze. Like my sister's fake tears while she let me take her place. Amelia's voice hardened. You think your curse makes you monstrous? I've lived with monsters who looked perfectly human. At least you're honest about what you are. Lorenzo reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face in one transformed hand. His touch was gentle despite the strangeness of his altered form. You're remarkable, do you know that? Absolutely remarkable. I'm just stubborn. There's a difference. No, stubborn would be refusing to see the danger. Remarkable is seeing it clearly and choosing courage anyway. His thumb brushed her cheekbone, and despite the coolness of his skin, the gesture sent warmth flooding through her. I don't deserve you, Amelia Hart, but I'm selfish enough to keep you anyway. Good, because I'm not going anywhere. She covered his hand with hers, holding it against her face. Now sit back down and talk to me until dawn like we always do. I want to know more about these enemies who are spreading rumors, and I want to know what exactly I should expect at this gala. They settled back into their chairs, and Lorenzo talked. He explained the complex politics of his world, the rival families who would love to see him weakened, the business associates who respected his power but feared his otherness. He described the Valenti Foundation Gala as a carefully orchestrated display of strength and legitimacy, where New York's elite rubbed elbows with carefully vetted members of his organization. It's theater, he said. Expensive, elaborate theater designed to maintain the illusion that I'm a legitimate businessman who happens to have some questionable associations. The curse complicates that narrative. So you're going to own it instead. Show them you're not hiding or ashamed. Exactly. And having you there, my wife, standing beside me without fear, it reinforces that I'm human enough to love and be loved, even in this form. His reflective eyes studied her. But Amelia, you need to understand the risks. My enemies will see you as a vulnerability, a way to get to me. Your safety will be in constant jeopardy. My safety was already in jeopardy the moment I married you. At least now I know what I'm dealing with. Lorenzo shook his head slowly. How are you this brave? After everything your family did to you, after being sold like property, how do you still have the courage to stand in the fire? Because hiding didn't save me. Being small and invisible and trying not to be too much didn't make my family love me. I spent 28 years trying to be safe and acceptable, and it got me nothing but discarded. Amelia leaned forward. If I'm going to live in danger anyway, I might as well do it on my own terms. Might as well choose something that actually values what I have to offer. Your voice, my presence, my complete, honest attention. She smiled slightly. Turns out those things are worth something after all. Who knew? I knew. From the moment I heard you read to those children. Lorenzo's expression softened. Tell me something. If you could go back to that day, knowing everything that would happen after, the marriage, the curse, this strange arrangement, would you still read that story? Would you still show up so completely that you caught my attention? Amelia considered the question honestly. Yes, because that's who I am when I'm doing something that matters. That's who I've always been when I'm not trying to make myself smaller for other people's comfort. And if being my full self is what led me here to a life where someone actually values that completeness, then yes, I'd do it all again. Even the parts where your family sold you? Even those parts, because they led me here. To someone who listens when I speak. To someone who treats my voice like it has power. She paused. Though I'm still furious at them. That hasn't changed. Good. Fury is honest. Use it. Let it make you strong instead of bitter. They talked through the night, and Amelia watched as Lorenzo's transformed features became familiar instead of frightening. She learned to read his expressions in this form, to see past the strangeness to the man beneath. By the time dawn began to gray the windows, she could look at him without any instinctive flinch, without any hesitation. As the sun rose, she watched the transformation reverse. His skin lost its luminescence, his eyes lightened back to storm gray, his proportions shifted back to human normal. Within minutes, he was the man she'd seen in his office, beautiful, dangerous, and entirely human in appearance. There, he said quietly, back to acceptable. You were acceptable before. Amelia stood, stretching muscles stiff from sitting all night. Different, yes. Strange, absolutely, but still you. Lorenzo stood as well, and in the morning light streaming through the windows, he looked tired, but something like hopeful. The gala is in 2 weeks. Between now and then, I need to prepare you. Vincent will work with you on the social dynamics, who to avoid, who to charm. Simone will create the perfect dress, something that makes you look like you belong at my side. He paused. I need you to practice standing beside me when I change. You did well tonight, but with hundreds of eyes on you, with cameras and judgment and scrutiny, it will be different. Then we'll practice. Amelia moved toward the door, then turned back. Thank you for showing me, for trusting me with the truth. Thank you for not running. His voice was rough with emotion. For staying when anyone sensible would have fled. Who said I was sensible? She left him standing in the dawn light, and as Marco escorted her back to her room, Amelia's mind was already racing ahead to the gala. 2 weeks to prepare for the most important performance of her life. 2 weeks to become the woman who could stand beside a transforming crime boss and make it look like love instead of obligation. 2 weeks to figure out if what she felt for Lorenzo Valenti was genuine affection or just the desperate gratitude of someone finally being seen. The days that followed were a whirlwind of preparation. Vincent drilled her on names and faces, teaching her to recognize allies from enemies at a glance. He explained the subtle power dynamics of Lorenzo's world, where a slight could start a war and a well-placed compliment could broker peace. You're representing more than just yourself, Vincent explained during one of their sessions. You're representing Lorenzo's humanity, his capacity for connection, the proof that he's more than just the curse. No pressure then, Amelia muttered. Vincent's smile was sympathetic. You're doing well. Better than I expected, honestly. You have good instincts for this. Simone brought sketch after sketch, working with Amelia to create a dress that would make the right statement. You need to look powerful, but not threatening. Beautiful, but not fragile. Like you belong at his side, but aren't just an accessory. She tapped her pencil against her tablet. It's a narrow line to walk. Story of my life, Amelia said dryly. But it was the nightly sessions with Lorenzo that mattered most. Each evening, as the sun set, she would enter that familiar room and watch him transform. Each night, she practiced standing beside him, looking at him without flinching, touching him without hesitation. She learned the exact moment when his eyes would shift from gray to that deep, reflective darkness, learned the way his presence would expand, filling the space around him with that electric otherness. And each night, they talked. About everything and nothing. About his childhood spent knowing he was cursed. About her years of being invisible. About the strange comfort they'd found in each other's honesty. Are you afraid? He asked one night, 5 days before the gala. Of what people will say about you after they see you with me. Terrified, Amelia admitted, but more afraid of going back to being invisible. At least this way people will see me. Even if they judge me, at least they'll see me. They'll judge you harshly, call you desperate or damaged or foolish for staying with someone like me. They called me worthless for being unable to have children. They called me disposable when my family sold me. What's a few more cruel labels compared to that? Amelia met his reflective gaze. Besides, you've taught me something important. Other people's judgment only has the power I give it, and I'm done giving my power away to people who don't see my value. Lorenzo reached out and took her hand, his transformed fingers cool and angular against her skin. You're going to be magnificent at this gala. Absolutely magnificent. I'm going to be terrified and trying not to show it. That's what magnificent looks like. Courage under fire. He squeezed her hand gently. 2 more things before the gala. First, I need you to meet my inner circle. The people who actually know about the curse and help me maintain the fiction of normalcy. They need to see that you're legitimate, that this isn't just another arrangement that will fall apart. Who are they? Vincent, you know. There's also Marcus, my head of security, Elena, who manages my legitimate business interests, and a few others. His expression was carefully neutral. They'll test you. Try to determine if you're genuine or just playing a role. Be honest with them. They respect honesty over performance. And the second thing? Lorenzo hesitated, and Amelia saw something like vulnerability cross his transformed features. I need to know if you're doing this, standing beside me, accepting the curse, preparing for the gala, out of obligation or choice. Because if it's just obligation, if you're forcing yourself to tolerate me because you have nowhere else to go, I'd rather know now. Amelia stood and moved to stand directly in front of him, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. I'm doing this because for the first time in my life, someone values what I have to offer. Because you listen when I speak like every word matters. Because you're honest about your darkness instead of pretending it doesn't exist. Because standing beside you, even knowing the danger and the scrutiny and the strangeness, feels more real than anything I've ever done before. She paused. Is that choice enough for you? Lorenzo's hand came up to cup her face, the gesture now familiar despite his transformed state. More than enough. More than I deserve. Stop saying that. You deserve someone who sees you clearly and chooses you anyway. That's exactly what I'm doing. He leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away, and pressed his forehead against hers. The gesture was intimate and vulnerable, and Amelia felt her heart clench at the trust it represented. Thank you, he whispered, for choosing this, for choosing me, for being brave enough to see past the monster everyone else fears. You're not a monster, Amelia said firmly. You're just a man carrying an impossible burden, and you don't have to carry it alone anymore. They stood like that for a long moment, foreheads pressed together, breathing in sync, while the fire crackled and the night deepened around them. And Amelia realized with startling clarity that what she felt for Lorenzo Valenti had evolved beyond gratitude or fascination. She was falling for him, both versions of him, the cold daytime strategist and the vulnerable nighttime soul, the ruthless crime boss and the man who valued her voice above all else. She was falling for a cursed man who transformed with the sunset, and she wasn't afraid anymore. She was ready. 2 days before the gala, Vincent brought Lorenzo's inner circle to meet her. They gathered in a private room in the mansion. Marcus, a hulking man with calculating eyes who radiated controlled violence. Elena, elegant and sharp-eyed, who looked at Amelia like she was an equation to be solved. And 3 others whose names and roles blurred together in Amelia's nervous mind. So you're the wife, Elena said, her tone neutral. The teacher who's managed to last longer than anyone expected. I am, Amelia said, lifting her chin. Why? Marcus's voice was deep, blunt. Why stay? What are you getting out of this arrangement? The question was clearly designed to test her. Amelia could give the diplomatic answer, the safe answer, or she could offer the truth. She chose truth. I'm getting to be seen, really seen, for the first time in my life. I'm getting honest conversation with someone who values my mind as much as my presence. I'm getting a purpose that actually feels meaningful instead of just filling time until I die invisible and forgotten. She met Marcus's gaze directly. And I'm getting a chance to matter to someone who matters. That's worth more than safety or comfort or social approval. Silence followed her words. Elena and Marcus exchanged glances. Vincent's expression remained carefully neutral, but she thought she saw approval in his eyes. You love him, Elena said finally. It wasn't a question. Amelia considered denying it, but what was the point? I'm beginning to, yes. Both versions of him. The daytime strategist who's honest about not feeling our connection the same way, and the nighttime soul who needs my voice to stay human. They're both him, and I'm choosing both. Marcus leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. The boss has never brought anyone to meet us before. Never asked us to accept someone into the inner circle. That means something. It means he's serious about her, Vincent said quietly. And it means we protect her the same way we protect him. She's part of this now. Amelia felt the weight of that declaration settle over her. Part of this. Part of Lorenzo's world, his organization, his dangerous life. There was no going back now. No pretending this was just a temporary arrangement that would fade when the novelty wore off. She'd crossed a line, and everyone in the room knew it. The gala will be dangerous, Elena said, all business now. Lorenzo's enemies will see you as leverage, a weakness they can exploit. You need to be prepared for threats, for manipulation, for people trying to separate you from his protection. I won't be separated from him. The words came out with more certainty than Amelia felt. Whatever happens at that gala, I'll be standing beside him when the sun sets. That's non-negotiable. Marcus's expression shifted to something like respect. Good. Because the moment you step away, the moment you show fear or doubt, his enemies will know the marriage is a sham, and they'll use that against him. Then I won't step away. Amelia straightened her shoulders. I won't show fear. And I'll make sure every person in that ballroom knows I chose this. Chose him. Chose all of it. Elena smiled, and it was genuine this time. You might actually survive this, Mrs. Valenti. You might even thrive. The meeting ended with strategy sessions on security, escape routes, and signals to use if Amelia felt threatened. By the time they finished, Amelia's head was spinning with information, but she felt more prepared, more ready for what was coming. That night she told Lorenzo about the meeting. They tested you, he said, unsurprised. They did. I think I passed. You did more than pass. Elena sent me a message saying you were either the bravest woman she'd ever met or the most foolish, and she hadn't decided which yet. Lorenzo's smile was visible even in his transformed state. Coming from her, that's high praise. 2 days, Amelia said quietly. 2 days until the gala. Until everyone sees what you become. Are you ready for that? I've been preparing for this moment for years. The question is, are you ready? Because once you stand beside me in front of those cameras, in front of New York's elite and my enemies and everyone who's ever doubted me, there's no taking it back. You'll be marked as mine, as the woman who chose the monster. I'm not choosing a monster, Amelia said firmly. I'm choosing you, all of you. The brilliant strategist, the ruthless crime boss, the cursed man trying to hold on to his humanity, the vulnerable soul who needs my voice in the dark. All of it? All of you. Lorenzo crossed to her and pulled her to her feet, his transformed hands gentle on her arms. You're going to change everything, Amelia Hart. You're going to walk into that ballroom and prove that love is stronger than curse, that choice is more powerful than fear, that a woman who's been called worthless can be worth everything. No pressure, though, Amelia said, but she was smiling. No pressure at all. He leaned down and pressed a kiss to her forehead, a gesture of tenderness that made her heart ache. Just be yourself. Be present, be honest, be the woman who shows up completely. That's all I need, that's all I've ever needed. As dawn approached and Lorenzo's form began to shift back to human, Amelia made a decision. She wasn't going to the gala to perform or pretend. She was going to show the world exactly who she was, a woman who'd been broken and rebuilt herself, who'd been discarded and found her own worth, who'd been sold to a monster and discovered he was just a man who needed someone to see him clearly. She was going to that gala to choose Lorenzo Valenti publicly and completely. And she was going to make damn sure everyone knew it was real. The night of the gala arrived with the inevitability of a storm that had been building for weeks. Amelia stood in front of the floor-length mirror in her room, barely recognizing herself in Simone's masterpiece. The dress was midnight blue, almost black in certain light, with a neckline that was elegant without being provocative, and a silhouette that made her look powerful instead of fragile. Diamonds, real diamonds, Lorenzo had insisted, glittered at her throat and ears, borrowed from a collection that had belonged to his grandmother. You look like you belong in his world, Simone said softly, making final adjustments to the hem. Like you were born for this. I was born in Queens to parents who could barely pay rent, Amelia said, but there was no bitterness in her voice anymore. Just fact. This is all performance. No. Simone met her eyes in the mirror. Performance is pretending to be something you're not. You're just finally wearing clothes that match who you've always been inside. There's a difference. A knock interrupted them. Vincent entered, impeccable in his tuxedo, his expression approving as he took in Amelia's appearance. Perfect, absolutely perfect. He checked his watch. The car leaves in 10 minutes. Lorenzo is waiting in his office. He wanted to see you before we go. Amelia's stomach fluttered with nerves and anticipation. How is he? Focused? Controlled? Ready? Vincent's gaze softened slightly. And more nervous about you seeing him in his daytime state at a public event than he is about revealing the curse to half of New York, if that tells you anything about where his priorities lie. It told her everything. Amelia followed Vincent through the mansion, her heels clicking on marble floors, until they reached Lorenzo's office. Vincent knocked once and opened the door. Lorenzo stood by the window, silhouetted against the late afternoon sun streaming through the glass. He turned as she entered, and for a moment neither of them spoke. He was devastating in a tuxedo that had clearly been custom-made to fit his exact proportions, his dark hair perfectly styled, his storm gray eyes sharp and assessing in his daytime state. But when he looked at her, something shifted in that cold gaze. warmed. "You're beautiful," he said quietly. Then with typical daytime Lorenzo honesty, "Though I'm telling you that as objective fact, not emotional response. The night version will feel it differently." "I know." Amelia crossed to him, comfortable now with the distinction between his two states. "Are you ready for this?" "I've been preparing for this my entire adult life. The question is whether the world is ready for it." He reached out and adjusted one of her diamond earrings with careful precision. "You understand what's going to happen tonight? At sunset, I'll transform in front of everyone. There will be shock, fear, disgust. People will react badly. Some of my enemies will try to use the moment to strike, either physically or politically, and you'll need to stand beside me through all of it without flinching." "I know. And you're still willing to do this." "I am." Amelia held his gaze. "Though I have one question. Why now? Why reveal the curse publicly after hiding it for so long?" Lorenzo's expression was grim. "Because one of my rivals, Dante Russo, has been spreading rumors about it for months, suggesting I'm not fit to lead because I'm compromised by something supernatural. He's been chipping away at my authority, making my associates question whether I'm fully human, fully in control." He paused. "If I don't control the narrative, he will. And his version will paint me as a monster who needs to be put down for everyone's safety. So you're going to show them that yes, you change, but you're still in control, still powerful, still human where it counts." "Exactly. And having my wife stand beside me, unafraid and devoted, proves that the curse doesn't make me a monster, just different." His hand came up to cup her face, the gesture clinical in his daytime state, but still somehow tender. "But Amelia, if at any point tonight you feel unsafe, if the danger becomes too real, Vincent has instructions to get you out. Your safety matters more than any political theater." "I'm not leaving you." Amelia covered his hand with hers. "We agreed on this. I stand beside you when the sun sets, no matter what happens." Something flickered in his gray eyes, the daytime version's version of emotion, muted and intellectual, but present nonetheless. "The night version is going to be overwhelmed by you tonight. Just warning you now. He's been dreading and anticipating this moment in equal measure. Then I'll be there for him. For both of you." Amelia straightened his bow tie unnecessarily, just to have something to do with her hands. "We should go. The car is waiting." The drive to the Plaza Hotel was silent, tension thick in the back of the limousine. Vincent sat across from them, reviewing something on his tablet. Marcus drove, with 2 additional security vehicles flanking them. Through the tinted windows, Amelia watched Manhattan slide past, the city that had always seemed so distant from her Queens apartment, now the stage for the most important performance of her life. Lorenzo's hand found hers in the darkness of the car, and he squeezed once. The gesture was pure calculation on his part, reassurance delivered because the night version would want him to offer it, but Amelia appreciated it nonetheless. "Whatever happens tonight," he said quietly, "thank you for choosing this, for choosing me." "Thank you for seeing me," Amelia replied, "for hearing my voice that day and deciding I was worth keeping." The Plaza's ballroom was already filled with New York's elite when they arrived. Amelia recognized faces from newspapers and society pages, politicians, business moguls, socialites, and carefully selected members of Lorenzo's organization who could pass for legitimate. Crystal chandeliers threw prismatic light across the crowd. A string quartet played something classical and elegant. Waiters circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres that probably cost more than Amelia used to make in a week. And everyone turned to stare as Lorenzo Valenti entered with his mysterious new wife on his arm. The whispers started immediately. Amelia could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes assessing her, judging her, trying to understand what kind of woman would marry the devil of New York's underworld. She lifted her chin and matched Lorenzo's confident stride, her hand resting lightly on his arm, her expression serene despite the butterflies rioting in her stomach. "Mr. Valenti." A silver-haired man in an expensive suit approached, his smile not reaching his eyes. "What a surprise to see you here with a guest. We'd heard rumors of a marriage, but we weren't sure whether to believe them." "Believe them, Senator." Lorenzo's voice was cold, controlled, perfect daytime authority. "May I introduce my wife, Amelia?" "Amelia, this is Senator Crawford. He sits on several committees that oversee financial regulation in the city." Translation: This man has power that could affect Lorenzo's legitimate business interests. Senator? Oh, Amelia extended her hand, and Crawford took it with the kind of limp handshake that suggested he didn't consider her worth the effort of a proper greeting. Charming, Crawford said, his tone suggesting the opposite. Tell me, my dear, how did you and Mr. Valenti meet? It's not every day one hears of him forming personal attachments. The question was designed to embarrass her, to make her fumble. Amelia smiled instead, channeling every ounce of the presence Lorenzo valued. He heard me reading to children at a school library. Apparently he liked my voice. She met Crawford's eyes directly. Sometimes the most important connections begin in the most unexpected places. Crawford's eyebrows rose fractionally, and Amelia caught the hint of approval in Lorenzo's expression. Point to her. The evening continued in a similar pattern. Lorenzo introduced her to business associates, political connections, and carefully vetted members of his organization. Some treated her with cautious respect. Others, like Crawford, made it clear they saw her as a curiosity at best, a liability at worst. But Amelia held her ground, channeling the woman who'd stood her ground with her family, who'd faced Lorenzo's transformed state without flinching, who'd chosen courage over safety again and again. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, visible through the ballroom's massive windows, the tension in the room ratcheted up. People who knew about the curse, and apparently more people knew than Lorenzo had realized, began to watch him with anticipation. Others simply sensed the shift in atmosphere, the way conversations became more strained, the way Lorenzo's associates began positioning themselves strategically around the room. "It's almost time," Lorenzo murmured to Amelia as they stood near the center of the ballroom. "Are you ready?" "No," Amelia admitted. "But I'm doing it anyway." His hand tightened on hers. "That's my girl. Just remember, stay close to me. Don't let anyone separate us. And if shooting starts, get behind me immediately." "If shooting—" "Wait, what?" But there was no time for Lorenzo to explain. The sun touched the horizon, and Amelia felt the change begin. It started subtly, that luminescence creeping into his skin, visible even in the ballroom's bright lights. Then his eyes began to shift, darkening and becoming reflective. The air around him changed, becoming charged with that electric otherness that marked him as not quite human. The ballroom went silent as people began to notice. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone dropped a champagne glass, the crystal shattering against marble with a sound like a gunshot. Lorenzo's transformation continued, unstoppable and inevitable. His frame expanded slightly, his features shifting to those sharper, more angular proportions. His presence grew, filling the space around him until every person in the ballroom could feel the weight of something other, something powerful, something that defied easy categorization. And through it all, Amelia stood beside him, her hand still on his arm, her expression calm despite her racing heart. "Ladies and gentlemen," Lorenzo's transformed voice carried across the silent ballroom, deeper and resonant. "I'm sure many of you have heard the rumors about me, about what I become when the sun sets. Allow me to confirm those rumors are true. I carry a curse that has plagued my family for 8 generations. It divides me, human by day, this—" he gestured to himself, "by night." The silence was absolute. Then chaos erupted. People began backing away, pressing toward the exits. Security guards who hadn't been briefed reached for weapons. And in the back of the room, Amelia saw a group of men moving with purpose toward Lorenzo, their hands inside their jackets. "Russo's men!" Vincent's voice crackled in the nearly invisible earpiece Amelia wore. "Get ready!" Everything happened at once. The men drew guns. Marcus and the security team moved to intercept. Someone screamed, and Amelia saw one of Russo's men, young, nervous, probably underpaid, raise his weapon with shaking hands, aiming not at Lorenzo but at the space behind him, at Amelia. She saw the moment he decided to fire, saw his finger tightening on the trigger, saw the calculation in his eyes, that killing Lorenzo's wife would destroy him more effectively than killing Lorenzo himself. Amelia didn't think. She moved. She shoved Lorenzo hard to the side and lunged toward the gunman, closing the distance before he could adjust his aim. Her hand connected with his wrist just as he fired, sending the bullet wide. It shattered a window behind them, and then Marcus was there, disarming the young man with brutal efficiency. But there were others. 5 more of Russo's men, all armed, all moving through the panicking crowd. Lorenzo's roar was inhuman, filled with rage and fear that Amelia had put herself in danger. His transformed state gave him speed and strength beyond human norm, and he moved through the attackers like a force of nature. But he was protecting Amelia, which meant he was fighting defensively instead of offensively, and one of Russo's men got through his guard. Amelia saw the gun rising, saw it aimed at Lorenzo's back while he was occupied with another attacker, and she made another split-second decision that would either save them both or get them killed. She grabbed a champagne bottle from a nearby table and brought it down on the gunman's head with every ounce of strength she possessed. The bottle shattered. The man went down, and Lorenzo spun around to see his wife standing over an unconscious attacker, breathing hard, her dress splattered with champagne and broken glass glittering in her hair. "Stay behind me," he growled, but there was something like pride in his reflective eyes. "No," Amelia said. "We fight together or we don't fight at all." The remaining attackers were subdued by Marcus and the security team within minutes. The ballroom was in chaos, guests cowering behind overturned tables, security everywhere, sirens wailing in the distance. And in the center of it all stood Lorenzo Valenti in his transformed state, with his human wife beside him, both of them disheveled and defiant and very much alive. "Well," Lorenzo said, his transformed voice carrying across the ballroom, "I believe that settles the question of whether I'm still in control, despite the curse. And whether my wife is devoted or merely performing." He pulled Amelia close to his side, his arm around her waist, possessive and protective. "Any other challenges to my authority? Any other tests you'd like to conduct? Or can we proceed with the actual purpose of this evening, which is raising money for children's hospitals?" The stunned silence that followed was broken by a slow clap. Elena emerged from where she'd been protecting a group of legitimate donors, her expression approving. "I believe the point is made, Lorenzo. Anyone who doubts your control or your wife's commitment is a fool." She gestured to the overturned tables. "Shall we restore order?" The next hour was a blur of police statements, security debriefings, and careful management of the press narrative. Vincent worked his magic, spinning the attack as an attempted robbery by desperate criminals that had been thwarted by Lorenzo's security team. The curse was acknowledged but downplayed. A family condition, unusual but manageable, certainly nothing that affected his business acumen or his control of his organization. And through it all, Amelia stayed at Lorenzo's side, her hand in his transformed one, making it clear to every camera and every witness that she was exactly where she chose to be. By the time they made it back to the limousine, Amelia was shaking with adrenaline crash. Lorenzo pulled her against his chest, his transformed arms wrapped around her with desperate strength. "You could have been killed." His voice was rough with emotion, the vulnerable nighttime version fully present now. "You put yourself between me and a gun. You attacked an armed man with a champagne bottle. You could have died, Amelia." "So could you." Amelia pressed her face against his chest, breathing in his scent, still familiar even in his transformed state. "He was going to shoot you in the back. I wasn't going to let that happen. I'm cursed and dangerous and surrounded by enemies. You're human and vulnerable and too brave for your own good. If something happened to you because of me..." His voice broke. Amelia pulled back enough to look up at him, at those reflective eyes that held so much fear and desperate affection. "Nothing happened to me. We're both alive. We survived. We more than survived." Vincent's voice came from the front seat. "The footage of you two standing together after the attack, covered in champagne and broken glass, looking like avenging angels, it's already all over social media. The narrative is set. Lorenzo Valenti, cursed but powerful, with a wife brave enough to fight beside him. It's perfect." "I don't care about the narrative," Lorenzo said, his gaze never leaving Amelia's face. "I only care that you're safe. I am safe. Because of you. Because of Marcus and Vincent and the security you put in place." Amelia reached up to touch his transformed face, her fingers tracing the sharper angles of his cheekbones. "We protected each other tonight. That's what partners do." "Partners?" Lorenzo's expression was stunned, as if the concept hadn't occurred to him. "You see us as partners." "Of course I do. What else would we be? I assumed you saw yourself as someone I protect, someone I keep safe." not someone who fights beside me. Then you assumed wrong. Amelia smiled despite her exhaustion. I'm not interested in being a possession you guard, Lorenzo. I'm interested in being the person who stands beside you when things get dangerous, who fights for you the same way you fight for me, who sees all of you, both versions, and chooses you anyway. The sound he made was half laugh, half sob. He pulled her close again, burying his transformed face in her hair. I love you. I don't know when it happened. Don't know if it was the day I heard you reading to children, or the first night you told me stories, or the moment you looked at my transformed face without fear. But I love you, Amelia Hart. Both versions of me love you, in whatever way each version is capable of feeling love. Amelia's heart clenched at the words, at the vulnerability and certainty in his voice. I love you too. The brilliant strategist and the vulnerable soul, the ruthless crime boss and the man who values my voice above all else. All of you, Lorenzo. I love all of you. He kissed her then, and despite his transformed state, despite the strangeness of his altered features, it was perfect. It was right. It was the culmination of weeks of honesty and trust and choosing each other again and again. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Vincent cleared his throat from the front seat. Hate to interrupt, but we have a problem. Well, not a problem exactly. More of a development. Lorenzo straightened, instantly alert. What development? Dante Russo is dead, shot by one of his own men during the chaos at the gala. Apparently, the young man you disarmed, Mrs. Valenti, was Russo's nephew, and he's singing to the police about everything. Russo's operation, his plans to kill you and take over your territory, the whole conspiracy. Vincent's smile was visible even from the front seat. Congratulations. You've just eliminated your primary rival without firing a single shot. Lorenzo and Amelia exchanged glances. The nephew turned on his own uncle? Amelia asked. Apparently, seeing you fight beside Lorenzo, seeing a woman risk her life to protect her husband while his own family was trying to kill him, made quite an impression. The kid is 22 and has been having doubts about the family business for years. Watching you tonight was the final push he needed to flip. Vincent shook his head. I've been in this business 30 years and I've never seen anything like it. Your courage literally changed the trajectory of a gang war. Amelia didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She'd gone to the gala expecting to play a role, to perform devotion for the cameras. Instead, she'd fought beside the man she loved and accidentally helped eliminate his greatest enemy. It was absurd and terrifying and somehow perfect. What happens now? She asked. Now, Lorenzo said, his transformed features softening as he looked at her. We go home. We rest. And tomorrow, when I'm human again, we figure out what our life looks like when we're not constantly preparing for public revelation or fighting off attackers. He paused. If you still want that life, if you still want me, I want you, Amelia said firmly. Both versions. Every complication, every danger, every strange, beautiful moment of this insane arrangement we've built together. I want all of it. Then you'll have it. Lorenzo kissed her forehead, a gesture of tenderness that made her eyes sting with tears. For as long as you'll stay, you'll have all of me. My protection, my honesty, my desperate need for your voice in the dark. Everything. They rode the rest of the way home in comfortable silence, Amelia tucked against Lorenzo's side, his transformed arm around her shoulders. The city lights blurred past the windows, and for the first time since she'd signed that marriage certificate, Amelia felt something that had eluded her for most of her life. She felt like she belonged, not because someone had chosen her out of desperation or obligation, but because she'd chosen herself. She'd chosen courage over safety, honesty over performance, love over fear. And in doing so, she'd found a man who valued exactly what she had to offer: her voice, her presence, her complete and unguarded self. The weeks that followed the gala passed in a blur of change and adjustment. With Russo dead and his organization in disarray, Lorenzo's position became more secure than it had been in years. The curse revelation, rather than weakening him, had somehow strengthened his reputation. The man who could transform into something other and still maintain complete control was even more terrifying than the man who simply ordered violence. But the biggest change was in Lorenzo himself. The daytime version, while still calculating and controlled, began to show more emotion. He started joining Amelia for afternoon tea in the library, discussing books and philosophy in his precise way. He asked about her day, her thoughts, her feelings, with genuine curiosity rather than just strategic interest. The night version is bleeding through, he explained one afternoon. His love for you, his need for you, it's strong enough that even the daytime version is beginning to feel it. Not the same way, not with the same intensity, but it's there. Is that a good thing? Amelia asked. It's unprecedented. But yes, I think it's good. He reached across the table and took her hand, the gesture still somewhat clinical but warmer than it would have been weeks before. You're integrating me, Amelia, making me more whole than I've been since the curse first manifested. I didn't think that was possible. The nighttime version, for his part, became less desperate and more content. The fear that Amelia would leave faded as weeks turned into months, replaced by a deep security in their relationship. He still needed her voice, still craved their nightly conversations, but it was less about survival now and more about connection. Tell me about your day, he would say as he settled into his chair, his transformed features now as familiar to her as his human ones. And she would tell him everything. The books she'd read, the conversations with Vincent and Elena, the strange new friendship she'd formed with Marcus, who turned out to have an encyclopedic knowledge of classic literature. They talked about her old students, about starting a literacy program through the Valenti Foundation, about what their future might look like. 6 months after the gala, as Amelia sat in the library working on curriculum plans for the Foundation's new reading initiative, Simone appeared with her tablet and an expression of barely contained excitement. Mrs. Valenti, I need you to come with me, now. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. Everything's right. Just come. Simone led her through the mansion to a wing Amelia had never been permitted to enter. Lorenzo's truly private quarters, separate from the room where they spent their nights. She opened a door to reveal a space that took Amelia's breath away. It was a library, but not just any library. Every book she'd ever mentioned loving, every author she'd discussed with Lorenzo, every genre she'd expressed interest in, they were all here. Comfortable chairs positioned perfectly by windows. A writing desk with expensive pens and leather journals. And on the center table, a note in Lorenzo's elegant script. You gave me your voice when I needed it most. Let me give you the space to find your own words. Write the stories you've been carrying. Teach the children who need you. Build the life you deserve. And when night falls, come find me and tell me everything. I love you. Both versions of me love you. L. Amelia's hands shook as she picked up the note, tears streaming down her face. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to find Lorenzo, human in the late afternoon light, standing in the doorway. Do you like it? He asked, and there was uncertainty in his voice that she'd never heard from the daytime version before. I wanted to give you something that was yours, a space where you could be fully yourself, pursue your own interests, build your own purpose. It's perfect, Amelia managed through her tears. It's the most perfect thing anyone has ever done for me. He crossed to her and pulled her into his arms, and Amelia marveled at how natural it felt now, how right. 6 months ago, she'd been a woman sold by her family, terrified of the monster she'd been married to. Now she was a woman who'd found her voice, her courage, and her home in the most unexpected place. I have something to tell you, Lorenzo said quietly. Something I learned yesterday from a specialist Vincent found. Amelia pulled back to look at him, worry creasing her brow. What is it? The curse. It's weakening, not disappearing, but changing. The specialist thinks it's because I'm more integrated now, less divided between my two states. And the reason I'm more integrated is... He paused, his gray eyes intense on hers. It's you, Amelia. Your presence, your love, your refusal to see me as two separate entities. You're literally healing what 8 generations of my family couldn't fix. I don't understand. The curse is breaking. Not breaking. Transforming. The specialist thinks that in time the split might fade entirely. I might become one person again, instead of 2 halves fighting for dominance. Lorenzo's voice was rough with emotion. You're saving me, Amelia. In every way a person can be saved. You saved me first, Amelia said fiercely. You saw value in me when my own family didn't. You gave me purpose and partnership and love. You made me brave enough to be myself. Then we saved each other. He kissed her softly, and the kiss held promise and hope and the kind of future Amelia had never dared to imagine. And we'll keep saving each other, every day, for as long as we both shall live. That night, as the sun set and Lorenzo began his transformation, Amelia watched with the same careful attention she'd given him for months. But tonight, something was different. The change was slower, less complete. His eyes shifted to that reflective gray. His presence expanded, but his features remained more human than they had been. "It's really happening," she whispered. "The curse is changing." "Because of you," Lorenzo said, his voice still deeper but less inhuman than before. "Because you loved both versions of me enough to make us whole." They settled into their chairs by the fire, and Amelia began to tell him about her day, about the library he'd built for her, about the literacy program taking shape, about the future they were building together. And as she talked, she realized that the woman who'd been called worthless, who'd been sold like property, who'd arrived at this mansion terrified and alone, that woman was gone. In her place was someone stronger, someone who'd learned that her voice had power, that her presence mattered, that she was worthy of love, not despite her perceived flaws, but because of the complete, honest, courageous person she'd always been. She was Amelia Valenti, teacher, partner, the woman who'd stood beside a cursed man and helped him become whole. And as Lorenzo listened to her with that same desperate attention he'd shown from the very first night, as the fire crackled and the city glittered beyond the windows, Amelia knew with absolute certainty that she'd found exactly where she belonged. Not in a mansion or a title or a life of luxury, though those things were nice, but in the presence of a man who saw her clearly, who valued her voice, who loved her with both halves of his divided soul. In a partnership built on honesty and courage and choosing each other again and again, no matter what the world threw at them. She'd been called worthless, but she'd proven them all wrong. She'd been sold to a monster, but she'd found a man. She'd been married for protection, but she'd discovered love. And as the night deepened and Lorenzo's transformation continued to soften, becoming less curse and more simply part of who he was, Amelia smiled and kept talking, kept sharing her voice, her stories, her complete and unguarded self. Because in the end, that was all it had ever taken. Her voice had saved them both, and it would carry them forward, together, into whatever future they chose to build.